Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Navigation. Pick up the Phantom Beast fruit at the beginning. Chapter 81. Father. Reiju looked at Judge in shock. She never imagined that her father, who had always been tough, would bow down so easily. Is anything okay? Hearing Judge's promise, Air couldn't help but turn around and look at Reiju, the only one who hadn't made a move just now. Under the murderous eyes of the three women behind him, Air pointed to Reiju and said, "Originally, I just wanted you to help me customize a battleship, but since you said so, let her come with me." "What do you think?" "What do I think? What the hell do I think? Your murderous aura is overflowing, do I dare to say no?" Judge forced a smile and reluctantly agreed, Of course, of course. "Yeah, thank you very much." Unexpectedly, Air stood up with a smile, took out a blueprint and a phone bug and threw it over. Judge reached out to catch it, and heard Air's voice in his ear. "This is a set of drawings of a power system. I hope you can improve it on the original basis and help me build a large aerospace battleship. I paid for my friendship and a personal strike, and used the phone bug to call me when I was in trouble." Quote. The friendship of the strong and taking action personally. Hearing this sentence, Judge held the phone, and his mood suddenly changed from gloomy to sunny. He opened the drawing and looked at it briefly, and then made some calculations in his mind. "It doesn't seem particularly difficult. If you can improve it, it won't be a problem if you rely on Germa's technology." Give me 1 month. I can make it in 1 month with Germa's technology." "Well, that's lucky for you. I'll come back in a month." After saying that, Air winked at Reiju, turned around and walked away waving his hand. "Father." Reiju looked at Judge, wondering whether he should follow him. After hearing her call, Judge turned his head and regained his serious expression, and said indifferently, "You are no longer a member of Germa. Let's go and get out of here." Reiju looked at him in disbelief, not expecting that he would be abandoned like this. But seeing his indifferent expression, she had no choice but to grit her teeth and turn around and follow him. After a few people left, Judge came to IG and others, pulled them out of the wall one by one, threw them to the ground and taught them a lesson. "How long are you going to sleep? Get up quickly." The three brothers shook their heads and stood up under his roar. IG rubbed his head and asked confusedly, "What's going on? Why did I faint just now? Idiots, haven't you figured out the situation yet? You were killed by the fire dragon Air in 1 move. I remembered, that fire dragon fool dared to kick me, I will never spare him." Niji thought about it and Taguchi shouted. Yongji was also indignant and glanced around, looking for Air and others. "Guy, where did he go? I'm going to kill him." Judge listened to the words of several people and sighed helplessly. "I couldn't help but think of what Air said before. A brainless idiot, just an ignorant person who has never seen the power of technology. Just wait, give me a little more time, and I will let the whole world know the horror of Germa." Running out of the castle, Reiju quickly followed Air and his party. After arriving at the three girls, she carefully introduced herself. Hello, I am Vinsmoke Reiju." The three girls were not as unwelcome to her as she imagined. Although Hina and Ain did not speak, they still nodded and smiled at her. Nasha came over to chat with her enthusiastically. "Hello, I'm Nasha, the one with dark green hair next to me is Ain, and the one with pink hair is Hina. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too." Nasha, who has a cheerful personality, became familiar with Reiju within a short time, and Reiju gradually relaxed and returned to his true nature. "Nasha, what's your relationship with Mr. Air? They can't be lovers." When she asked, Nasha looked at Air shyly, then nodded generously and admitted. "Not only me, but also sister Hina and Ain, there is also a little girl named Vivi who is also his fiancée." Really? I didn't expect the legendary fire dragon Air to be such a person." Reiju was a little surprised, but he still accepted it. In her opinion, it is not strange for a strong man like Air to have many partners. Wait, she stopped suddenly, "so he took me with him because he took a fancy to me, right?" Thinking of this, she looked at Air strangely. "Why are you dazed? Come up quickly." Quote. Seeing her standing still, Air, who had already stepped onto the boat, couldn't help but remind her. Okay." Hearing Air's voice, Reiju quickly came to her senses and trotted onto the boarding ladder. Only then did she react. Why is there a boat in the square? Reju looked down curiously and found that the boat was suspended in the air. He couldn't help but ask Nasha. This ship can fly. What is its power? Where is the jet? After hearing her series of questions, Nasha smiled mysteriously, pointed at air and said, Air is the driving force, and the ship is driven by his fruit ability. Really? That's it. Reju, who didn't know much about air, nodded and wrote down the information. Well, it will take some time for Judge to complete the new battleship. We are not in a hurry to go back to Alabasta. Let's just hang out in the kingdom of Bon. The women looked at each other and nodded in agreement with the decision. So, Air controlled the refitted warship and sailed towards the interior of the kingdom of Bon. Kingdom of Bon, royal capital, Tarbet City. King Guy Erwin Tabor listened to the report of his ministers and paced anxiously in the hall. Your Majesty, the king's army has been defeated, and the soldiers have suffered heavy losses. Your Majesty, I can't hold on any longer. Please leave the capital as soon as possible. Yes, please leave as soon as possible. As long as you are still there, there will be hope for the kingdom of Bon. Your Majesty. Listening to the chatter of the ministers, Tabor interrupted them angrily and roared. Asshole, how could I, the king of Bon, abandon my citizens and the soldiers who fought bravely on the front line and run away alone? The ministers looked at the 25-year-old king in front of them, who had only been on the throne for 3 years and had an immature face, and their hearts were full of admiration. But admiration is admiration. It is a fact that the enemy has already reached the royal capital. Although the enemy has temporarily retreated, it will only be a matter of time before the royal capital falls. His Majesty has no children at the moment. He is the only bloodline left in the royal family. If he insists on holding on, the kingdom of Bon will be completely over. Just when the ministers were thinking about whether to knock out His Majesty the King and send him away by force, a soldier hurried into the hall and fell to the ground gasping for breath. Everyone was shocked, thinking that Germa had launched another attack. So he quickly gathered around the soldiers and started asking angrily. What's going on? Did Germa call? Didn't they retreat? Did they deliberately confuse us? Say it quickly. Okay, shut up, everyone. Tabor stopped everyone with a loud shout, walked up to the soldier with a glass of water, knelt down and handed it to him and said gently. Don't be anxious, drink some water and speak slowly. The soldier looked at the considerate king gratefully, took the drink and drank it in one gulp, then he breathed a sigh of relief and said, Your Majesty, a ship has just flown into the royal capital from the sky. The flag on the ship is exactly the same as the Alabasta flag that was widely circulated in newspapers some time ago. What? Everyone was shocked by the news. In recent times, Alabasta's name has been well known. First, the king was killed, and the entire country was kicked out of the alliance by the government. Later, Marine launched the strongest buster call in history, but was blocked by the Fire Dragon Air alone, and even Admiral was captured. Finally, the Fire Dragon Air even killed the Holy Land, and a flood almost flooded the entire Holy Land. How could such a werewolf come from a country where a ship came to the kingdom of Bon? They didn't receive any news in advance. There was Germa in the front and Alabasta in the back. The ministers were completely desperate for a while. But when King Tabor heard the news, his eyes lit up, as if he had found a savior. Quick, send someone to contact the people on the ship. No, I will go there myself. I have thought of a way to save Bon. As he said that, Tabor rushed out with an anxious look on his face. The other ministers were full of questions, but seeing that His Majesty had all run away, they had no choice but to rush out together. When King Tabor came under the spacecraft, he was told by a soldier watching here that someone had just got off the ship. After hearing about this, Tabor hurriedly sent people to search everywhere. Not long after, soldiers sent word that the person had been found. So Tabor quickly led the ministers to find him. At this time, Air and his party were enjoying delicious food leisurely in a private room of a luxury hotel. Not far away from the few people, the hotel manager and 2 service staff were standing tremblingly, serving the few people carefully. Really, I just came here to have a meal. Is it like this? Stuffing a large piece of meat into his mouth, Air said vaguely. Swallow the food before you speak. Hina punched him on the back, neither lightly nor hard, and Air almost choked to death. Haha, you are the infamous God Slayer, isn't it normal for everyone to be afraid of you? You see, when the people in the hotel heard that you were coming, they all ran away. Quote. Reju held his chin up and said with a smile while watching the interaction between several people. She didn't know why the atmosphere between Air and others made her feel at ease. After struggling to swallow the meat, Air took a big drink of water, spit out his breath, and said unhappily. It's not because of Thel Fool 5 elders. Laozi is doing well in Marine. He is about to be promoted to Admiral candidate, and then he can become Admiral. These fools actually stabbed me secretly. I should have thrown more meteorites in the Holy Land and killed all those idiot celestial dragons. Quote. Air vented his anger, and the 3 former Marines, Hina, Ain, and Nasha, lowered their heads sadly. The 3 managers waiting next to them were huddled in the corner, covering their ears, whispering words like, I can't hear, I can hear. Reju smiled slightly and was about to say something when Air suddenly said. The food is almost done, and the person who just happened to pay has arrived. The women looked at him in confusion, not understanding what he meant by the person who paid. Air smiled and did not explain, but shouted to the manager hiding in the corner. Mr. Manager, Your Majesty the King is here. You'd better go out to greet him. Everyone else should go out too. Thank you for your service. I'm very satisfied. The 3 managers heard Air's words and breathed a sigh of relief. They all bowed to him and left the box as if they were running away. Seeing them running away in embarrassment, Air's smile froze on his face, and he sighed helplessly. My good reputation has been completely destroyed. Under the guidance of the soldiers, Tabor and his party had just arrived at the door of the hotel when they saw a man coming out and bumping into them. The manager was surprised when he looked at the group of people in front of him, but thinking of Air's instructions, he quickly said. Your Majesty the King, Mr. Air asked me to come out to greet you. Quote. Tabor was stunned for a moment, then opened his mouth in shock and asked in disbelief. Mr. Air, could it be the legendary fire dragon Air? That gentleman actually came in person. After receiving the manager's confirmation, Tabor took a deep breath and said to the manager firmly. Take me there. We can't keep Mr. Air waiting any longer. Your Majesty the King. The ministers who also recovered from their surprise heard this and quickly spoke to stop him. But he was interrupted by Talai waving his hand. Stop talking, this is the only way to save the kingdom of Bon. After saying that, he walked towards the box under the leadership of the manager. The ministers bit him and quickly chased after him. When we arrived at the door of the box, before the manager even knocked on the door, there was a voice coming from inside. Come in. Several people's hearts trembled, and they instinctively feared the person behind the door. Tabor suppressed the nervousness and fear in his heart, pushed open the door without hesitation, and strode in. After seeing what was going on inside, he walked up to Air, took off his crown, knelt on the ground, and asked. Mr. Air, please save the kingdom of Bon. I am willing to do whatever you want me to do. Your Majesty. The ministers behind them looked at His Majesty the King, who was kneeling on the ground, and shouted quickly. But Tabor ignored them and buried his head lower, determined to do his best no matter what Air asked. Looking at His Majesty the King, an elderly minister also threw away his crutches and knelt on the ground. Upon seeing this, the other ministers, including the manager, also fell to the ground and knocked their heads on the ground in silence. Air crossed his legs and looked at the people kneeling down. Thinking of the conversation in the palace that he had just heard with his sense of knowledge, Air couldn't help but smile. Save the country. You are not a bad king. Tabor and the others raised their heads and looked at the man in front of them expectantly. Then join me. As long as you become a part of Alabasta, I will protect you unconditionally. Air said these words that shocked everyone. Join Alabasta, Tabor stammered. Good Li Jiao, that's right, of course it's up to you whether you want or not, I won't force you. Tabor and the ministers all fell silent, not knowing how to make a decision for a while. Air did not rush, patiently lit a cigarette and waited for their choice. Soon, Tabor made up his mind, raised his head and looked at Air firmly, nodding in agreement. Yes, as long as I can save the kingdom of Bon, I am willing to join you. Air looked at Tabor and his party calmly, and said calmly. It's not just a simple matter of joining. Bon will lose its kingdom title and become a province and merge into Alabasta, and you will also lose your king title and become an ordinary noble. Quote. It doesn't matter, that's enough. Please help us. Tabor agreed without hesitation. In that case, Air stood up, walked to him and stretched out his hand. Welcome to join us, Duke Tabor. Tabor looked at the hand in front of him, grabbed it and stood up. I'll trouble you later. It's not a big deal. I've kidnapped Germa's princess. I just need to ask her to help. Right, Reju. Only then did Tabor notice that there were members of the Vinsmoke family among the few people, and he subconsciously showed an angry look. But when he heard that she had joined Air's camp and was considered one of his own, Tabor had no choice but to accept it. Reju smiled at him, took out his phone and told Judge what happened. After hearing this, Judge pinched his nose and recognized it, and promised to give up this commission and not attack the Kingdom of Bon. After the negotiation, Tabor warmly invited Air and his party to live in the palace, and he followed him without refusing. Ah! With two screams, Reju and Tabor were transformed into vampires by Air. Looking at their new form, both of them looked surprised. What kind of fruit power user are you? In addition to controlling objects to fly, I have seen you use fire and lightning in the past 2 days, and now there is another vampire. Looking at the vampire, let's call it a succubus, Reju in the succubus form, Air said calmly. How should I put it? This was originally my secret and could not be told, but since you have been transformed, I will tell you. I was born with a special physique and am a person with multiple fruit abilities. I currently have 4 fruit abilities: Fire Dragon, Thunder, Vampire, and Piao Piao. Quote. Nani. Reju and Tabor looked at him in shock, their outlook completely shattered. The 3 Hina girls looked at their ghostly expressions and covered their mouths and snickered. Nasha hugged Reju's arm and said with a smile, from now on, we are a real family. Nasha. He looked at Nasha who was leaning on him, and then at Hina and Ain who were looking at them with smiles. Reju also showed a smile. A family. It feels pretty good. Quote. While the girls were enjoying themselves, Tabor stood aside and looked at his feet, feeling embarrassed and wondering whether he should leave. Air saw his dilemma and spoke to ease his embarrassment. Tabor, tell me about the specific situation of the Kingdom of Bon. Ah, yes. Tabor sorted out his words and began to tell Air in detail. The Kingdom of Bon was founded 200 years ago and has been ruled by our Gyervan family for generations, but it is not a government member. For the entire North Blue, Bon is only a small country, with a land area of only 218,000 square kilometers and a population of only 467,000. This was based on statistics before the war began. However, the Kingdom of Bon has pleasant scenery and livability, and a large number of foreigners come to visit every year, so our tourism industry is very developed. At the same time, our land is very fertile and suitable for farming. 1/3 of the land is covered by forest vegetation and is rich in forest resources. And there are also mineral resources with considerable reserves, especially the fact that we recently discovered a gold mine with a reserve of about 50 tons of gold. But it is precisely because of this that our neighboring countries, which have been eyeing us for a long time, directly launched a war against us. At the same time, the other party also hired the Germa Legion to defeat us step by step. Quote. Listening to Tabor's introduction, Air became more and more satisfied with this small country that he had temporarily decided to annex. After thinking for a while, he opened his mouth and said to Tabor, go and inform your people that we will leave after my new warship is built. I will raise the entire Kingdom of Bon high into the sky and fly to the Grand Line to meet Alabasta. Quote. Lift, enter high altitude. The entire Kingdom of Bon. Tabor swallowed his saliva, unable to imagine what kind of power it would take to send a country to the sky. But he had no doubts, nodded and went to prepare. After he left, Air shamelessly sat between Hina and Ain, hugged one with one arm, looked at Reju and said, Reju, you have a younger brother, right? The Vinsmoke family should have 5 siblings. Reju looked at Air in surprise, not expecting that he even knew this. Yes, I have a younger brother named Sanji, how do you know him? He let go of Ain who was fighting for position with Nasha, hugged Hina and moved to the side. Air patted the empty seat next to him and said, sit down and let's talk slowly. Without any hesitation, Reju sat down next to Air and leaned his whole body against him. Exclamation mark exclamation mark exclamation mark exclamation mark exclamation mark exclamation mark. Where should I start? I met a yellow-haired boy named Sanji in East Blue before, and his circled eyebrows left a deep impression on me. I met you siblings today, and when I saw your unique circled eyebrows, and the names Ig, Niji, and Yongji, I guessed whether you had a younger brother. Quote. Holding Reiju's slim waist and smelling the fragrance on her body, Air said nonsensically. Nasha. East Blue. I went there too, why didn't I notice it? Reiju was very happy to hear that his long-lost brother was still alive and continued to ask. How is he doing now? I haven't seen him for many years since we were separated when we were young. Has he realized his dream of being a chef? Well, he's living a good life. He was taken in by a man named Zapu, who taught him how to cook. Now he works as a chef at Bharati, a famous sea restaurant in East Blue. Air briefly told Reiju about Sanji's situation, and also introduced Zapu's deeds to her. When Reiju heard that Zapu had broken a leg for Sanji, he made up his mind to thank him in person when he saw him in the future. Even Hina and others were stunned after hearing this story. They never thought that a pirate would make such a big sacrifice for a kid they had never met in a common dream. Looking at their looks, Air smiled strangely. Do you still want to hear a story? Come to my room and let's talk slowly. In this way, Air told stories to several girls every day, and occasionally did some consensual. 1 month passed quickly. When Air and her children came to Germa's snail ship again, the girls were surprised by a huge luxury warship. The ship's exterior is covered with a layer of gold, reflecting dazzling light in the sun. There is a huge dragon head on the bow, which looks like it may have been copied from the form of Air's fire dragon in the newspaper. There is a thing that looks like a jet CEFJ at the stern of the boat. Air guessed that this should be a device similar to the Feng Lai Bing. There are 3 functional sails on the deck, with the Alabasta flag painted on them. The judge who came to greet them looked at the surprised expressions of the women and snorted with disdain, but on the surface he still introduced them to everyone in a very gentle manner. This is a super battleship built by combining Germa's highest technology. The ship is 1,100 meters long and 325 meters wide, with a total of 8 floors, 2 of which are artillery floors, which can accommodate 400 to 600 artillery pieces. According to your drawing, it relies on electric current to provide power, can fly freely in the sky, and is also equipped with external wheels to ride on the sea. In addition, there is. Judge talked a lot, and in the end he became more and more excited and even started dancing. Ignoring the eloquent judge, Air and his party boarded the battleship directly and started touring around. Judge, is this a super battleship or a luxury yacht? What do you mean by building a 100*100 swimming pool? And in this room, the big bed is big enough for even a person to sleep in. Not to mention there are a series of entertainment facilities on board such as an aquarium, sauna, bar, chess and card room. Looking at Judge, who had just boarded the deck at this time, Air excitedly stretched out his thumb and praised. Great job. I'm very satisfied. Seeing that even a big shot like Air praised his work, Judge puffed up his chest proudly. Of course, this is the crystallization of Germa technology. It is definitely the most perfect work in the world. Air didn't know if it was the most perfect one. He only knew that this magnificent ship would be his from now on. After a few more words of encouragement to Judge, Air asked him for the design and then controlled the spacecraft to leave. Judge watched his work rise into the sky with satisfaction, watched them leave, turned around and walked back. Suddenly he stopped, looked back at the sky in disbelief, and shouted in shock, "Hey! I didn't even tell him how to operate, how did he drive the boat away? Oh, he's a lion fruit user, so that's okay. No, then why did he ask me to build this spaceship?" Not to mention Judge, who was full of question marks, Air drove a spaceship to the sky above the kingdom of Bon, and directly used the ability of lion fruit to lift the entire island into the sky. After controlling the island and following behind the spacecraft, Air and others came to the power room of the spacecraft. Hina crossed her arms and looked at Air, who was supplying energy to the spacecraft, and asked doubtfully, "Can't you take the spacecraft off? Why do you need to build such a power system?" Hearing Hina's question, Air let go of his power transmitting hands, looked at her and shook his fingers and said, "My goal from beginning to end is just this power system. I want domestic scientists to imitate this electric flying device. With this, plus the generator that has been researched, Alabasta can independently produce a spacecraft that can fly freely in the sky. Quote. Listening to Air's story, the four girls all exclaimed in admiration as they thought of the scene in the future. Is this possible? This kind of thing shouldn't be possible with Alabasta's technological level. Even Ain, who knew little about technology, felt that this idea was too far-fetched. Don't worry, they are all talents I poached from the government, and their skills are still good. Reju, who was fairly familiar with technology, also spoke. Father gave me the blueprints. If the scientist you say is capable enough, I can definitely copy it according to the blueprints. After hearing her words, the girls felt relieved and stopped caring about these things. They took Air and continued to walk around the spacecraft. After visiting for a whole morning, and roughly figuring out the entire ship with the help of the provided map, a few people came to the bar and sat down to chat. Now, Air, have you thought of a name for this ship? Nasha poured wine for several people and looked at Air curiously and asked. Name, I really haven't thought about this. Air held his chin and thought for a while, then suddenly slapped his thigh and said with a smile. How about we call it the Beauty Crystal Palace? In the future, this ship will bring countless beauties from all over the world, and then. Before he finished speaking, Hina, Ain, and Nasha punched him one by one, forcing him to shut his mouth. Sorry, I was just joking. Air, who had 3 big bags on his head, apologized sincerely to the 3 women. Idiot, if you really dare to do this, I will definitely kill you. Ain threatened fiercely, and sat back in his seat angrily, holding his chest. Air smiled coquettishly, came to her side, hugged her waist, and explained. What I said is not unreasonable. Think about it, this ship will be our main ship when going to sea from now on. It would be inconvenient for you if there were only men on the boat, so you might as well change them to women. Listening to his absurd reasoning, Ain slapped his dirty hands off his waist and turned around and ignored him. Air smiled and saw that she didn't refute, knowing that it was done. Haha, no kidding, I have decided to name the ship World Conqueror. What do you think? This time the women did not refute, they all nodded in agreement. After confirming the name of the ship, Air simply picked up Ain, and under the strange looks of several women, turned and walked towards the bedroom. I don't know how good this big bed is, so Mr. Air decided to try it for himself. In this way, the extravagant Mr. Air lived a ridiculous life of waking up from a pile of women every day. This time, not only Ain, Hina, and Nasha, but even the woman Reju directly participated in helping Air complete 4 kills. The 4 girls may have awakened some strange attributes. Not only is the demand strong, but he also often performs various tricks for Air. He also unlocked the unique experience in the succubus form, which fascinated Master Air. Moreover, Nasha's ability finally came into use at this time. Air hereby announces to all men that soft and hard fruits have officially replaced transparent and rubber fruits and become the strongest fruits that men dream of. This feeling of being able to stand still is simply stronger than taking drugs. Air's physical condition almost caused him to collapse. Of course, apart from the above-mentioned love between men and women, Air and the others also did some serious business. Relying on the North Blue map in the control room and 360-degree surveillance, Air found many inhabited and uninhabited islands in North Blue. There was someone there. Air showed up and saw the legendary fire dragon on the other side. Air immediately surrendered and agreed to leave with him. No one, Air, no matter what resources there are, as long as they look good, he will pack them up and take them away. So, in the sky, in addition to the Conqueror leading the way, followed by the Kingdom of Bon, several small countries or cities covering tens of thousands of square kilometers. Behind them are some small islands with an area of 5,000, or even 3,400 square kilometers. A total of 23 islands, large and small, were captured by Air. Combined, these islands would bring 476,000 square kilometers of land to Alabasta. In this way, Air returned to Alabasta across the Calm Belt after leaving countless legends about the disappearance of the island in North Blue. 10 days later, Alabasta, in the square of the royal capital Albana. Ikarem's voice spread through the radio throughout Alabasta. Nationals, let us cheer for Queen Vivi, for Prince Air, and for Alabasta. Witnessed by countless people, Vivi, who was standing on the high platform, took the crown symbolizing power from air and put it on her head calmly. At this moment, wearing a snow-white luxurious dress, in the eyes of everyone, she was like a goddess from myths and legends who descended into the mortal world and came to the world. Long live Your Majesty Vivi. So beautiful, Your Majesty Vivi. Her Majesty Vivi and Her Majesty Air must be gifts given to us by the gods. Vivi's face turned red as she enjoyed the cheers of the crowd. Looking at the dense crowd below, she smiled from the bottom of her heart. She walked to the podium vacated by Ikaram and said, "Everyone, I am very happy that you can come to my coronation ceremony. On this grand day, I have something to say to you." Vivi took a deep breath and spoke sincerely into the loudspeaker. Once upon a time, Alabasta was dusty and barren. The few remaining lands were often plagued by drought. But 3 years ago, a man stood up and led everyone to plant trees, build water conservancy projects, and improve the domestic environment. We also found Sky Island thousands of miles away, which brought us rain clouds so that we no longer lacked rain. In my opinion, I am not worthy of this crown, nor can I bear everyone's expectations. This crown should have been his. But he came to me and comforted me, saying that this country does not need a king who runs around every day, a king who only knows how to use force and has no brains. What is needed is a kind, smart, lovely and charming queen who is considerate of the people and considers them. Speaking of this, Vivi and the people below laughed. But I still want to say, thank you, Air. Thank you for everything you have done for Alabasta, thank you for taking care of me over the years. If you can, please marry me when I come of age. Please help me govern this country as the Queen's husband. Quote exclamation mark exclamation mark exclamation mark exclamation mark quote. The people were completely excited. They cheered to support the bold Queen Vivi and cheered her up. This unexpected scene caught Air off guard. Originally, according to the plan, Ikaram should have announced their marriage to everyone. He never expected that Vivi would propose to him in public on such an occasion. After being stunned for a while, Air came back to his senses. Seeing Vivi's shy but stubborn eyes looking into his own, he smiled helplessly. He walked straight forward and held her in his arms. "No problem, my dear queen." As he spoke, Air leaned down and kissed her lips lovingly. Witnessing this beautiful moment, the people were not stingy and gave their applause enthusiastically. On the high platform, Ikaram, Yaka, and Belle standing aside were wiping tears in excitement. "That's great, Your Majesty Cobra, have you seen it? You will definitely bless the two His Highnesses in heaven. Woohoo." 5 people from the RU unit also participated in the ceremony as senior officials of the kingdom. Doreen, the only female among the 5, shed tears and threw herself into Lin En's arms, sobbing softly. Lin En felt her body temperature, her limbs stood stiffly, and she didn't know where to put her hands. Until Theodore, who couldn't stand it anymore, slapped him on the back of the head and winked at him. Lin En Kai hugged Doreen stiffly and whispered comfort. After a long time, the lips parted. Air looked at her soft eyes, smiled and hugged her slim waist, turned around and said to the people in the square, "Everyone, I also have a gift for Your Majesty and everyone today." As he spoke, a huge screen projected by a telephone bug appeared above Air's head, with photos and information about the Kingdom of Bon on it. "Hereby, with the approval of Her Majesty Vivi, I declare Guy Erwin Tabor, the former King of Bon, to be the Duke of Bon. Thanks to him for volunteering to lead the Kingdom of Bon to join Alabasta and become part of us." Quote. As soon as the words fell, warm applause broke out in the square. Tabor, dressed in formal attire, also came forward from behind, kneeling on one knee in front of Vivi with a knight's sword in hand. Vivi stepped forward, picked up the sword, tapped his shoulders, and held a canonization ceremony for him. Then he gently helped him up and put a noble medal symbolizing the duke's status on his chest. Tabor bent down to salute, held the right hand handed to her by Vivi, and carefully kissed the ring on it to show her loyalty. When the process was over, Air announced loudly to everyone, "Everyone, not only the Kingdom of Bon, I have also brought more than 20 islands with fertile land and rich natural resources. I will use my abilities to link these islands with Alabasta, and everyone can choose the island of their choice to live on." Quote. When the people heard the news, they became even more excited looking at the picture on the screen above, and cheered Air's name loudly. Air pressed his hands and waited for the people to calm down before continuing to speak. Although we have a new home, we must not forget Alabasta itself. This is the land that gave birth to us and raised us. Starting from today, the royal family will increase wages for environmental improvement work such as afforestation. I hope everyone can contribute to our motherland. Quote. After he finished speaking, he paused, and after waiting for the enthusiastic response from the crowd, he continued. At the same time, the royal family will add a new policy. As long as a family gives birth to a child, the state will pay a one-time parenting fee of 300,000 belly. And every month, the state will give the family a subsidy of 10,000 belly until the child reaches adulthood. Quote. After talking about a series of policies to encourage environmental protection and childbirth, Air also announced that he would once again select elites across the country to trick him into joining the RU Army. This time, not only the military, but also ordinary people across the country who have confidence in their own strength are allowed to sign up. Finally, for a better future, long live Alabasta. Air raised his arms and shouted from the high platform. The people also shouted enthusiastically, long live Alabasta. At this point, Vivi's coronation ceremony is finally over. The people gathered together in twos and threes and left happily. Air and Vivi also breathed a sigh of relief and returned home surrounded by everyone. Returning to her new bedroom, Vivi immediately collapsed on the bed, too tired to speak. For today's coronation ceremony, she had been getting up since 4 a.m. to dress up, and was dragged by Ikaram to rehearse the process several times. Now all the bones in her body are falling apart, and she has no strength to even sit up. Air came to lie down next to her, looked into her eyes, smiled and said, "Dear Her Majesty the Queen, you performed really well just now. Even I was scared by you. Why?" When Air mentioned this, Vivi covered her head with the quilt in shame and anger, shrinking into an ostrich form and not daring to look at him. Pulling the quilt, seeing that she ignored him, Air smiled evilly, pretended to stand up and said, "Ignore me. Then I'll go, your sister Hina is still waiting for me." "Stop." Vivi stood up, grabbed Air's clothes, looked at him fiercely, and warned. "Don't go, stupid Air. I went to North Blue and brought back a shady woman. You are obviously my husband." Seeing the jealous Vivi, Air picked her up and put her on his lap. This way of holding a child made Vivi struggle in embarrassment. "Pa, do not move." Vivi's face turned red and she became quiet. She pressed against Air, smelled his reassuring scent, and whispered, "Bad Air, you already have me, but you still want to find so many women." Stroking her hair, Air remained silent and did not speak. "Hey, Air, you will stay with me forever, right?" "Yeah, of course." Vivi snorted, curled her face, and whispered, "I will forgive you generously." The next day, Vivi got up early to deal with government affairs. And Air, who was named prince and military minister, was not idle either. He called Yaka early in the morning and gave him a task. "Looking for a suitable island. I know, I will select the right people from the king's army to complete this task." Yaka stood in front of the table and Taguchi promised. The task assigned to him was simple. In a few days, Air planned to send some men off the island. That is to say, while forming a secret intelligence department, they also asked them to go to the Four Seas in the first half to find some resource-rich islands and report to Air regularly. At that time, Air will personally go there, and regardless of whether there are people on the islands, he will take these islands into his pocket and merge them into Alabasta. After sending Yaka away, Air found Lin and asked him about the latest situation of the RU unit. "Your Highness Air, the soldiers who were eliminated when selecting the RU unit were reunited by Mr. Gaka to form the reserve unit of the RU unit, referred to as the RUR unit. They have also received 6-style training before, and under the training of Mr. Binz in the past few months, 7 more warriors have been born who have mastered 1/6 style." Hearing Binz, Air slapped his forehead. After so long, he almost forgot about this good brother. Don't let this kid Binzi lead new people. Give the troops to Yaka. Let him plant trees with lush fruits for me. After saying that, Air thought for a while and then said, "After all, not everyone can master the 6 styles. I am very satisfied with more than 100 people. RUR unit, right. From today on, the treatment of this unit will be improved to a level second only to that of the RU unit. At the same time, the establishment will be controlled at 5,000 people. After the elites across the country are selected, these people will be tested in pairs, and those who fail will be kicked out directly. And told them that in the future, the RUR troops will face challenges from all elites in the country. As long as they lose, they will be immediately replaced by challengers. Until you persevere and learn the 6 styles to enter the RU army. Lin's heart trembled when he heard Air's words. According to this method, it is estimated that every RUR member would not even be able to sleep in order not to be eliminated. As he thought about it, he inexplicably began to feel sorry for those in the RUR unit. People from the Bonn area will also participate in the competition this time. You will personally take people there to supervise. Remember to ensure fairness and justice and not to embarrass Alabasta. Lin N trembled, stood at attention, saluted, and accepted the task. After Lin left, Air took care of some trivial matters before stretching and standing up from behind the desk. I'm so tired. After working for less than 3 hours, Air looked at his watch and left the office and went straight to get off work. Today, Vivi is learning to handle government affairs, and Hina and the others are traveling on a new island. When he left the palace, he didn't know what to do for a moment. While walking, Air came to a heavily guarded building. Looking at the words, Royal Research Institute, written on it, he thought for a while and caught up. When the soldiers on duty at the door saw that it was His Royal Highness, they quickly moved out of the way without blocking him. Nodding to them and the 2 RU members hiding in the dark, Air stepped in directly. Passing through the front hall, Air came to a laboratory familiarly, opened the door and walked in. Idiot, it's not just gold that conducts electricity. It would be too wasteful to use pure gold as an engine. You have so much money, why don't you give it to me for research? Then tell me how to do it. If you don't have experience, it would be pretty good to be able to copy the same thing. If you want to improve it, you will need to spend a lot of time researching it. Quote. That's because you are too stupid. Give me a little more time and I will definitely be able to make something better. As soon as Air entered, he saw about 10 young men and women in white coats, surrounding a young man and greeting him fiercely. Judging from their appearance, it would be impossible to finish in an hour or 2. Helpless, Air had no choice but to cough lightly and interrupt their argument. After everyone turned around and noticed him, he said angrily, Doctors, why are you arguing again? What's the reason this time? When the young people surrounded in the middle saw Air coming, they ran over quickly, grabbed his arm and pulled him to a golden machine. Your Highness Air, this is our new power engine. According to your drawings, all the parameters are exactly the same. Nani, did you make it? It's exactly the same. Air opened his mouth in surprise and looked at him in shock. The young man puffed up his chest proudly, patted the golden engine and said proudly, Of course it is true, although it is indeed a bit difficult at the beginning. But after reading the drawings you gave me and the information given by the girl named Reiju, I relied on my fruit ability to lead everyone to make it in 5 days. Reiju, is it information related to Germa technology? If so, it makes sense. This young man's name is Andy. Although he looks young, he is actually 91 years old. This guy has the ability to learn fruit, and he can learn any knowledge by just reading it. He is a scientist who has extensive interests and is famous all over the world. He used to work for the government, but as he grew older and older, he left the government. After trying countless methods to alleviate aging, he simply settled down and lived a leisurely retirement life of fishing and drinking wine. A year ago, Air heard rumors about him and took him to Alabasta after promising to restore his youth. Andy didn't take his words to heart at the time. He just enjoyed the high compensation provided by Air and continued to live a day-to-day retirement life. Until Air got the vampire fruit and found him again. After learning that he could truly return to his youth, Andy accepted Air's first embrace without thinking, and returned to his 20s under the infusion of vitality. At this point, Andy returned to the laboratory and started working for Air to pay off his debts. Other seemingly young scientists were also kidnapped by Air for similar reasons and then transformed some time ago. As expected of Dr. Andy, nothing can trouble you. Air looked at the golden engine with joy and gave him a thumbs up. Humph, you don't have to say it. But it has been done, but the cost is too high. In order to make this engine that can drive a 1,000-meter warship, we used gold equivalent to 20 billion belly, which is basically 1/5 of the gold reserves in the national treasury. Air waved his hands indifferently and said, "It's okay. I don't plan to use this engine. I'll just wait until you improve it to make an excellent engine and then rework it." Don't want it. Then isn't it that our hard work for so long was in vain? Zero. Andy looked at Air angrily and accused him. Air quickly comforted him and explained, "Don't be angry, I didn't expect you to do it directly. And my main purpose is to let you accumulate experience and lay the foundation for future small civilian spacecraft engines. Why?" Hearing Air's words, Andy's attention was immediately diverted, and he then began to think about the possibility of the small civilian engine that Air mentioned. Air did not disturb him, but while observing the big engine, he communicated with other scientists about the problems they encountered. After about 10 minutes, Andy raised his head, walked to Air and said, "With current technology, it's impossible in a short time. But I can try to replace some materials to reduce the cost first." Air scratched his head, "I'm not very good at technology. Just ask for whatever you need and I'll try my best to get it for you." Andy nodded with satisfaction, went to the table in front of Air and said, "First come the research funding of 10 billion Baileys." By the time Air came out of the Academy of Sciences, his legs were weak. These fools scientists really think that money comes from strong winds, right? They ask for tens of billions and tens of billions of funding. According to them, the gold Air brought back from Sky Island over the years and all the belongings extorted from the government some time ago, combined, are not enough for them to burn in 2 years. Although I know they are exaggerating, it is true that scientific research burns money. Moreover, in Alabasta now, whether it is the military, various engineering construction, or even welfare subsidies, a large amount of money is needed. Air had to find a way to find an additional way for Alabasta to make money. When it comes to making money, the first thing Air thinks of is Gilder Tezzolo, known as the Golden Emperor. This guy who controls the world's largest entertainment city is simply a business genius. At first he was just an ordinary slave, but after eating the golden fruit, he embarked on a life of cheating. In the end, he controlled 20% of the world's Bailey, reaching the terrifying level of being able to control the celestial dragons with money. For such a big fat sheep, if nothing else, if he cut off a piece of his golden ship and brought it back, he could at least get tens of billions of bellies in exchange for it. Thinking about it, Air couldn't help but salivate. Write it down in a notebook first, and then hit it when you have time. In addition to the Golden Emperor, Air also thought of other ways to get money, such as the endless sea below. In this world where the ocean accounts for 80% of the area, countless precious resources are buried deep under the sea, but they are basically unexplored. In order to make rational use of resources, in the following days, the great master Air began to use his ultra-wide range of vision and the electromagnetic waves generated by thunder fruit to explore the nearby sea areas. As long as the electromagnetic wave returns feedback, Air will release a thunderbolt to cover the entire seabed, and then use lion fruit's ability to pull it up. Then these mineral veins will be sent directly to the country, and Ikaram will gather manpower to mine them. These seabed resources did not disappoint Air. In addition to normal iron resources, there are also many rare minerals such as copper, lead, silver, gold and other minerals. Some additional little gains brought him quite a surprise. Devil fruit. Where did it come from? Air held a drop-shaped fruit and asked the soldiers beside him. "It's on the sunken ship you just sent. This ship should have just sunk to the bottom of the sea not long ago." Not only did the brothers find a large number of Baileys and gold jewelry, but I also found this fruit in a small box. Quote, "Yeah, it seems you are in good luck. You will collect the 10 million Bailey bounty later, and at the same time, your military rank will be upgraded by 3 levels as a reward for your initiative to hand over the devil fruit." "Yes, thank you, Your Highness Air." The soldier bowed excitedly and trotted away happily. After the others left, Air turned into thunder and lightning and came to the palace. Calling Vivi, the two went to the study to check out the devil fruit illustrated book. "Logia, Yuyu fruit. Well, it's not bad. How about it, do you want to eat it?" Air handed the fruit to Vivi and asked. Vivi thought for a moment, took the Yuyu fruit, and took a bite. After a period of retching, Vivi's body quickly changed. After a while, she turned into a puddle of water and fell to the ground. Air leaned down, poked at the water, and explained. This is elementalization. For those who have not mastered hockey, this is an unsolvable ability. Gulu Gulu. What did you say? I can't go back, please save me. After Vivi ate the rain fruit, Air had another job besides regularly moving mines. That is to teach her how to use her abilities every day. Air doesn't expect her to become more powerful, as long as she masters elementalization skillfully and has a certain ability to protect herself. After 2 months of working as a coolie and teacher, you finally received a piece of good news. After so long of excavation, Alabasta already contains a large amount of iron ore. In order to maximize profits, Air decisively asked people to choose the location and built a large arsenal on the new island he brought back before. Although the arsenal has not yet been fully built, it can already smelt the iron ore stone to make simple weapons. Air heard the news and quickly took the kingdom's senior officials to inspect. After receiving the news, the person in charge of the arsenal, Kosha's father Dodo in the original work, quickly came out to greet him and took Air and others to visit the weapons production process. Your Highness Air, this is the electric forging machine provided by the Academy of Sciences. With it, our iron smelting efficiency has been greatly improved. There is also this stamping machine tool. The gun parts it makes not only have small dimensional errors, but also save a lot of material. Quote. Dodo pointed at each type of machinery and introduced them to everyone one by one. People like Ikarim and Hina who knew nothing about technology were all amazed. Only Air and Reju, who was born in Jerma, were relatively calm. Nodding, Air was very satisfied with the machines provided by the Academy of Sciences. At the same time, he also asked about the production of weapons. Don't worry, Your Highness, we implement a 3-shift, assembly line system, and now we can produce 50 rifles every day. And with the expansion of the factory, skilled workers and a steady stream of machines being delivered, our production capacity is still expanding. Quote. After listening to the introduction, Air looked at a rifle that had just been made and improved by scientists, holding his chin and thinking. This is a high-end product. The wholesale price is 50,000 Baileys per bottle, right? Now there are 1,500 of them a month, which translates to 75 million Baileys in money. Putting aside the cost, the profit is at least 10 times, this is a huge profit. Air was trembling with excitement at the thought of a steady stream of money coming to him in the future. Very good, Director Duo. From now on, the factory will be counting on you. I will continue to recruit workers in the future, and I will also urge them from the Academy of Sciences to ship new machines over as soon as possible. Dodo was very excited about Air's regard. He said that he would live up to expectations and perform his duties as a factory director. Air encouraged him a few more words, met with the workers, gave a speech, and then left with them. On the way back, Hina couldn't help but ask curiously, with so many weapons, except for the ones left by Alabasta himself, what should we do with the rest? With a mysterious smile, Air took a newspaper from Nasha on the side, pointed to the news on it, and said, Didn't the government falsely accuse Uncle Cobra of colluding with the Revolutionary Army? Well, Lousy will show him the collusion. I believe they who are waging rebellion all over the world will love my gift. Quote. Hina read the newspaper, which read, the Revolutionary Army took action again, and another country in East Blue fell. So you plan to sell arms to the Revolutionary Army? If this news is known to the government, the 5 elders will definitely be furious. Tisk, the more uncomfortable they feel, the happier I feel. And speaking of the government, my mission this week has not been completed. Air said, closing his eyes and feeling the sky above the Holy Land thousands of kilometers away from him, where hundreds of tons of poop were ready to move. Following his control, excrement rained all over the Holy Land, coating it with a golden coat. Since the last time the Holy Land was flooded, Air has been throwing something into the Holy Land from time to time every week. In addition to water and sand, he also threw some rotten leftovers. This time, he gathered all the feces in the royal capital and threw them all over. Show off a style that will disgust you to death even if it doesn't kill you. I heard that the celestial dragons have recently been discussing the relocation of the Holy Land. It seems that those idiots with glass jars on their heads can't stand it anymore. Since he decided to trade with the Revolutionary Army, Air immediately took Hina and the girls and set off in the Conqueror Lu. East Blue, Kingdom of Sendern. At this time, the country had been completely occupied by the Revolutionary Army, and the king and most of the nobles had fled early. Without this group of exploiters, the people began to rebuild their homes with hope, full of illusions about a better future. But within a few days, more than a dozen marine warships arrived. A rear admiral from the headquarters escorted the former king of Sendern, intending to regain the lost territory. The people who had just lived a stable life for a few days could not allow the exploiters to enslave them again. They began to fight back under the leadership of the Revolutionary Army. When Eyre and his party came here, they saw such a vibrant scene where everything was in full swing. Ignoring both sides of the battle, the conqueror swaggered across the battlefield and arrived at the original royal capital, now the stronghold of the Revolutionary Army. The huge conqueror stopped over the royal capital. Eyre and the others jumped off calmly. As soon as I came down, I saw a group of people holding weapons and surrounding me vigilantly. Eyre smiled, waved to them, and said hello. Hello, I have some business I want to discuss with you. I don't know who is the top official here. As soon as they saw his face, the soldiers of the Revolutionary Army recognized him and their expressions changed drastically. Eyre, the slayer of the national god. It's Eyre who attacked the Holy Land and massacred the celestial dragons. What should I do? Is he an enemy? How do I know? Don't relax, everyone, wait for the order from the Legion commander. Looking at these people, even though they were very afraid of themselves, they still took up weapons to defend themselves sternly. Eyre couldn't help feeling that he was indeed a revolutionary warrior with strong beliefs. Hearing the man mention the Legion commander again, he also asked in surprise, Legion commander? Is it Betty from the Eastern Army? The soldiers did not answer his questions, but silently prepared for battle. He shook his head helplessly, and just as he was about to stun them with conquerors, a voice sounded from behind the crowd. Put down your weapons. He is not an enemy. Everyone turned around, and when they saw the person coming, they all made way. A beautiful woman with a purple bob haircut, sunglasses, and a red top hat opened her chest and exposed her hot figure and walked out through the crowd. She took a puff of cigarette, took off her sunglasses, looked at Eyre and asked, "Does the famous fire dragon Eyre have anything to do with the Revolutionary Army?" Moving his eyes away from her broad chest, Eyre looked at her, spreading her hands, and smiled. "Don't be so heartless. It was clearly written in the newspaper that our King Cobra colluded with the Revolutionary Army and planned to cause trouble in the World Summit. We should be a family." HMPH, that's just a boring trick of the government. You should know very well that there is no contact between us. Tell me your true purpose quickly, I don't have time to waste with you. Quote. Okay, you are such an impatient woman. Seeing her opening her mouth to chase people away, Eyre helplessly teased her, and then with a wave of her hand, 2 large boxes flew down from the sky. After patting the box, Eyre looked around and said, "Miss Betty, won't you invite me in to sit down? I sincerely want to do business with you." The two looked at each other for a while. Betty, who didn't see anything on his face, took a puff of cigarette, turned around and said, "Follow me." Cold woman. Quote. After muttering, Eyre controlled 2 boxes and followed her with a few women. The group of people came to the palace, which was probably the living room. Betty took a pot of tea and put it on the table, then walked to the opposite side and pulled out a chair and sat down. Looking at the teapot on the table, Eyre couldn't help but complain, "What about your hospitality? Do I even have to pour the tea myself?" Betty ignored his complaints and went straight to the point and asked, "Okay, tell me what kind of business you want to discuss with us." Cut. Unhappily, he put the box on the ground. Eyre took out a rifle and said, "You have caused rebellions all over the world, and Japan is in short supply of weapons. Take a look at our brand new rifle produced by Alabasta. It has a long range, fast reloading, and can fire 8 rounds in a row. Order now and not only will you get 50 rounds of ammunition for each gun, but we will also customize an additional solid gold pistol for you as a gift. How about it? Do you want to buy tens of thousands of them to try?" Looking at the eloquent Eyre, Betty's mouth twitched, and the image of a master she had seen in newspapers completely collapsed in her heart. But she did become somewhat interested in the rifle in Eyre's hand. "Rifle, what's the difference between it and a musket?" As she spoke, she pressed a certain button, and a metal clip popped out. Looking at the strange pointed bullet, Betty was a little confused. Hee. Of course it's different. This is a semi-automatic rifle that scientists developed after 2 years of research. Humph, the difference is huge. This gun uses special bullets made in my country and has an effective range of 700 meters. The biggest advantages are high precision, high power, easy operation, blah blah. In short, 200,000 Baileys is definitely worth the money. Quote. Betty gestured with the gun, then went to the window and fired a few shots outside. Then she put the gun back on the table with satisfaction and said, I do not want me. Air almost jumped out of his chair. He had been talking for a long time and his words were almost dry, but you just said this. What, are you playing with me? Looking at the angry Air, Bay. D said calmly, the weapons are very good and easy to use. But we have no money. 200,000 yuan is enough to buy more than 10 ordinary muskets. Phew, it turns out it's too expensive. Air pretended to be confused for a while, gritted his teeth, slapped his thigh, and said, Since you are the first customer, I'll give you a cheaper price. How about 170,000 for one tube? Sorry, if it's 10,000, I can consider it. Considering that you have an. Is this how you bargain? No, the minimum is 150,000, it can't go any lower. 20,000, if it's 20,000, I'll take it all. No way, at least 130,000, any less and I will lose money. The two bickered and argued for a long time, and finally settled the deal for 60,000 each. Betty first placed an order of 1,000 rifles to test the waters, and also asked Air to provide 100 free bullets and 2 magazines for each rifle. Air all nodded in agreement, but as for the price of bullets, Air insisted on 50 Baileys a round. No matter how much Betty asked for advice, he would not let go. As an appeasement, Air promised to give her some of the weapons eliminated by the king's army for free, and Betty finally agreed. The two signed the agreement amicably and shook hands to reach a consensus. It was agreed that someone would be sent to complete the transaction in 1 month. Before leaving, Air looked at Betty, who came to see him off, and said with a smile, Miss Betty, I have always paid high respect to the Revolutionary Army. Please help me say hello to Mr. Long. After saying that, Air took the deposit of 20 million belly and left with a smile. Watching the spaceship turn around and leave, Betty also turned back to the room and reported the deal with Air to the leader dragon. After hearing this, Long made no comment and just let Betty handle it on her own. On the spaceship, after Air put away the small coins, he happily hugged Ain and Nasha and kissed each of them on the face. Reju stood aside and said with a smile, Brother Air is really awesome. The purchase price is higher than expected. Haha, this is only secondary. What really makes me happy is that the price of bullets has been set. Hum, it won't be long before the Revolutionary Army will realize that aside from the price of the gun itself, the ammunition consumed each time is the bulk of the expenditure. Quote. Just kidding, just buying the rifle is just a one-time purchase, Air will sell it even if the price is lower. What he values is the subsequent supply of ammunition, especially after the submachine gun or heavy machine gun is manufactured, the consumption of bullets will probably make Long feel distressed. Just when Air was dreaming about making a lot of money in the future, he was interrupted by a rapid call from the phone. Bolu. Air opened his clothes, found the one calling Jungwon among the row of telephone bugs, and took it out. This phone bug, I remember it was. Without thinking much, Air picked up the phone. Moses, Morgans, why are you looking for me, a birdman? Air said unceremoniously. Yes, this is exactly the phone bug that Newsbird brought him before. As for Morgans, Air has been unhappy with him for a long time, and this fool dared to call him. Ha, Fire Dragon, don't be so angry. I have good news to tell you. Don't you want to hear it? If you have anything to say, tell me quickly. Lousy is in a good mood today and won't argue with you. Morgans, who was on the hot air balloon ship, took the latest information and said with a smile. Is it a deal with the Revolutionary Army? It seems that you made a lot of money, and this will be the headline of tomorrow's newspaper. It's up to you. By the way, the government is not bad. By the way, what do you want to see me for? By the way, I'm here to send a message to 4 Emperor's aunt. She seems to like you very much and plans to invite you to visit all countries. Then Morgans told heir the whole story in detail. It turns out that Auntie sent Katakuri to Alabasta in an attempt to win over heir. However, just a few days after Katakuri set off, he disappeared along with his country. After a fruitless search in the first half, Katakuri had no choice but to return to Wangguo. But the aunt still refused to give up, so she used her connections to spread the word in the underground world and let the news out that she wanted to invite heir. It just so happened that Morgans had left a phone bug for heir before, so after learning the news, he wanted to give heir face, and by the way, he wanted to make big news and contacted him directly. Heir, Auntie's invitation. Okay, I have nothing to do anyway. Tell her to prepare the banquet and wait for Laozi's arrival. After finishing the call with Morgans, heir had just put away the phone and several girls immediately gathered around him. They all talked about their opinions, and they all agreed that the aunt had no good intentions and advised heir not to go. Okay, no matter what her purpose is, I decided to take a look. If she dares to take action against me, I don't mind pulling her down from 4 emperors. And even if she has any backup plans, with my it's okay to escape quickly. Having said this, heir looked at the women around him and advised. Don't go this time. If we really fight, I may not be able to take care of you. Let's go back to Alabasta first, and after arranging some things, I will go to Wangguo alone. The girls were a little reluctant to hear this, but they also knew that their strength was not enough in front of the 4 emperors, so they had no choice but to nod and agree. Seeing their frustrated looks, heir chuckled, picked up one of them in one hand and walked towards the bedroom. Come on, let me show you some new tricks today. There was a storm inside the ship, but it was calm outside. Soon, Chong the Conqueror arrived in Alabasta. The Conqueror's sky-blocking figure crossed the entire kingdom and stopped on the outskirts of the royal capital under the dull eyes of countless people. After getting off the ship, he asked Hina and others to recruit manpower during his absence and complete the equipment of the ship's artillery as soon as possible. After arranging several women, heir called other people to give instructions one by one, and after staying for 2 days to deal with some government affairs, he transformed into a dragon and rushed to the 10,000 kingdoms alone and leisurely. He just patted his ass and left, but Vivi, who stayed at home all the time, felt uncomfortable. Since becoming the queen, she has to deal with a large number of politicians every day when she opens her eyes. Although she has the assistance of Ikaram and others, a series of new policies in the kingdom require her further arrangements and inspections. She not only has to inspect the selection of RUR troops, but also goes to each newly added island to inspect the living conditions of local residents. In short, she was extremely busy, and even Karu, the running duck who had been following her, was too tired to move. Vivi, who finally returned to the royal capital after 5 days of inspection, looked at the 4 women in front of her and her eyes lit up and she asked. You are back. Where is heir? Looking at Vivi with 24 big eyes and bright eyes, she spread her hands and said with a smile. It's a pity, Your Majesty, that your knight not only abandoned you, but also stayed with us. Vivi was very disappointed when she heard that heir was gone. But soon she cheered up again and said to the 4 girls. Since you are also left behind, go to bed early and go to the Academy of Sciences with me for an inspection tomorrow. Hey, little girl, we are not your subordinates, why should we listen to you? Ain crossed his chest and spoke unconvinced. As heir's fiancé, of course you have to listen to me as the eldest sister in the family. Vivi showed no sign of weakness, took out her identity as heir's fiancé, and retorted. Just when Ain was about to retaliate, Hina said quietly. Hina can't pretend you didn't hear this. No matter in terms of age or strength, Hina should be your sister. And little girl, I have always kept heir's valuables, including his life certificate and noble medal. Quote. Explosive killing. After hearing this, the women were speechless, because heir had already given one life sheet, the one in Hina's hand. The medal of nobility is a symbol of his status. He is the only prince-level medal in the country. Unexpectedly, this medal also belongs to Hina. The other women couldn't help but secretly curse heir for being partial, but they couldn't blame heir. Indeed, as Hina said, she was older than them and stronger than them. Moreover, she has a stable personality and is very calm at all times. Even if there is an emergency, she can quickly calm down and think of a corresponding solution. So Air subconsciously regards Hina as the eldest sister in the family and leaves some important matters to her to take care of. Vivi and Ain, who were originally on opposite sides, looked at each other and formed a new alliance with a tacit understanding, and Nasha joined in without hesitation. Reju, on the other hand, was not interested in what it meant to be a big sister, and just covered his mouth and snickered. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became strange, and an aura comparable to conquerors rose among the women. Just then Ikaram walked in, but when he saw this situation, he quickly turned around and tried to escape. Stop, Reju. I'm watching a show. Ikaram froze in place, turned around stiffly, and showed an awkward yet polite smile. Looking at the four women who were staring at him fiercely, with the murderous intent behind them about to materialize, he smiled dryly and asked. Ah, by the way, I suddenly remembered that Dr. Andy wants to see me for something, so I'll leave first. Ikaram stepped back, ready to run away at any time. Wait a moment. Vivi stopped him, took a few steps to come to him, restored her previous gentle smile, and said. Hey, Ikaram, do you have a business report? Ah, this, that. Ikaram glanced at Hina behind her and said hesitantly. That was His Highness's order before he left. He hoped that Miss Hina would inspect the situation of the newly added islands for him. He would investigate whether the residents who moved to the island encountered any difficulties, and authorized Miss Hina to handle it for him. Quote. After saying that, he lowered his head and did not dare to look at Vivi's face. That's right, let Sister Hina handle it for him. Vivi murmured to herself, scolding Vice Admiral Air 100 times in her heart, but she still maintained a smile on the surface. Don't bother Sister Hina with such a small matter. As the queen of this country and Air's fiancé, I have accepted this task. She added an accent to the word fiancé and grabbed the task without hesitation. Don't even think about it. This is a task assigned to me by Air. Hina will complete it well. Hina stood up and started fighting with Vivi without giving up. The other girls also joined in. From the beginning, Vivi, Ain, and Nasha were fighting against Hina alone, and then the four of them started to fight with each other, until even Reju was involved. Ikaram ran away a long time ago. He didn't dare to stay in this ghost place for a second. After several hours of quarreling, the girls temporarily reached a consensus that everyone would complete this task together, and the status of the eldest sister would be confirmed by Air personally when she returns. At this point, a war without gunpowder is finally over. But what they never expected was that before Air came back, there would be a huge surprise waiting for them soon. Back to Air, after leaving Alabasta, Air in dragon form kept flying, stopping on an island from time to time to visit various unique scenery. The day before yesterday, Air came to Red Line again. As soon as he arrived here, he thought of his old friends. Thinking that he had not greeted them in the past 2 days, they were probably lonely, so he happened to find a sea area where a submarine volcano was erupting and the seawater was boiling. With the idea of letting the celestial dragons take a hot bath, he evacuated the boiling water in a radius of several kilometers, leaving a bottomless black hole filled with seawater, and then he came to the sky above the Holy Land again. Open the door, kind-hearted people are giving out benefits. Regardless of whether the people below heard it or not, he shouted and poured the boiling water down. Then he transformed into thunder and lightning and ran away. Open corner bracket woohoo, it feels so exciting to pretend to be cool and run away. In this way, the leisurely Air spent more than half a month and finally came to the territory of New World Toto Land. Flying over Cake Island, Air directly announced his arrival with a dragon roar. Just as he was about to land after pretending to be X, he heard a voice followed by a terrifying slash coming towards him. The Spear of Air Bafu Wio. You fat lady is playing sneak attack. Air quickly transformed into a human form, pulled out the Exukiri and responded with a powerful slash. Thunder Flame Mode 1 Sword Style Hyphenation Point Breaking Moon and Sky Breaking Slash. The two attacks met and collided in midair, and the entire Cake Island began to tremble violently. The residents who didn't know what happened thought it was the ants' syphoria that broke out again, so they hurriedly ran out of the house and prepared to escape. But as soon as they went out, they found that the sky had turned dark without knowing it. What made them even more uneasy was that the sky was torn apart and streaks of lightning were swimming in the clouds. This doomsday-like scene scared many people into screaming. Aren't you too enthusiastic, Charlotte Linlin? Sheathing the sword, Air looked at the fat figure in the castle and said calmly. Well, little fire dragon, you are finally here. I have been waiting for you for a long time. Air, who put the captain's hat back on her head, heavy makeup on her face, and a large pink dress, looked at the sky and grinned. As soon as he finished speaking, an overwhelming force of conquerors pressed towards him, hitting Air's heart directly. Air was not afraid and also launched Conqueror's counterattack. For a moment, there was thunder all around, and the powerful pressure made ordinary people unable to breathe. Even the ants' children, who had just heard the noise and rushed here, had a hard time resisting the hedging momentum, and many of them who were young and weak had simply fainted. Just when everyone in the Charlotte family thought that their mother would start a big battle with each other, the pressure suddenly relaxed, and they both took back the conquerors at the same time, and the ant laughed wantonly. Well, the guests are here, let's have a banquet. Oh. Air fell back to the ground and looked at the ant playing face changing and couldn't help but secretly complained, what a crazy woman. Single quote. Speaking of which, Cake Island is really magical. The house is actually made of desserts. Looking at the houses made of desserts around him, Air wondered if he should take a bite. Just when he was about to take action, the circus performer with a long tongue and a candy cane, oh no, Charlotte Parrosparrow walked towards him. Cuckoo, Mr. Air, welcome to Toto Land. Please come with me. The banquet has been prepared for you. Really? Then please lead the way. Looking at him, Air didn't think much and said with a smile. Parrosparrow stretched out his hand and made a gesture of invitation, turned around and walked ahead. Air followed closely, and the two of them quickly arrived at the castle's banquet hall without much verbal exchange. As soon as he came in, Air's eyes were opened. In the banquet hall, most of the ants' children have arrived. Most of them have strange shapes. Not to mention how handsome and beautiful they are, but they can also be said to be crooked melons and bad dates. His arrival attracted everyone's attention. Looking at Air walking step by step, many timid women's legs trembled. In addition to part of it being due to his amazing record, part of the reason is that when Air led Marine to ruin Auntie's tea party a year ago, the Charlotte family sent people to stop it. As a result, 10 warships led by 5 ministers including Dafu and Owen, who were the most powerful in the family, were attacked by Air's full-power Thunder Flame Dragon in one encounter. Roar destroyed. Even Dafu and Owen were shot down into the sea and were seriously injured and almost died. At this time, when Dafu and the others saw him again, their calves were trembling and they did not dare to look at him at all. Air showed a faint smile after observing everyone's reactions with his eyes. Arriving in front of the huge kingdom, looking up at the ant who was like a mountain of flesh, Air smiled and said hello. Ms. Linlin, it's our first time meeting you. I brought you some small gifts. After saying that, there were sounds outside the castle, and everyone in the castle looked outside curiously. Soon, Parrosparrow's phone rang, and soldiers reported to him that a hill had fallen outside the city. Everyone looked at Air again, wondering what he meant. This is a gold mine that was discovered accidentally. I don't know how much gold can be mined from it, so I gave it to the Charlotte family as a meeting gift. Nani. Auntie's children couldn't help but open their mouths when they heard that Air had directly given away a gold mine. You must know that even if the stock is in a small gold mine, it is worth a lot of money. I didn't expect that. I just give it away if you say it will be given away. What they didn't know was that Air had just dug it up on his way here. This is only a small part of it, the real big head is still floating in the sky. Linlin, who was sitting on the throne, looked at Air below, and the little unhappiness in his heart was completely eliminated. 770. She spread her hands and welcomed her warmly. Well, boy Air, I have accepted your gift. You are welcome to be a guest. The children's banquet has begun. After saying that, the castle immediately became lively, and everyone started drinking and bragging. Air was also invited to sit at the table with Auntie and taste the skills of chefs from all over the world. I have to say that Auntie's chief chef, Long Bread, is a person with the ability to eat fruits. Both desserts and other dishes are delicious. Even Air, who came from the big foodie empire, ate to his heart's content for a while. The ant was very happy to see Air gobbling up the dessert, and chatted with him while eating the dessert. Hey, boy Air, you are very brave. I heard from Morgans that the celestial dragons suffered a lot of casualties in the last attack on the Holy Land. Ah woo, gee you. After swallowing a big mouthful of meat, Air took a sip of juice and said with a smile, "Isn't this great? It would be good for the world if these garbages died more, right?" Hearing his answer, the ant couldn't help laughing. She liked such an arrogant guy. "Aren't you afraid of the world government's revenge? There are still many powerful people in the celestial dragons or the government." Regarding this question, Air smiled disdainfully and said, "If I were afraid, I would not attack the Holy Land. And we have been enemies since the establishment of the government 800 years ago." Auntie's eyes lit up, and she suddenly felt that there were secrets inside that she didn't know about. Seeing her like this, Air stopped eating, wiped his mouth and said to her with a smile, "What, are you interested in the secrets of the government? If we cooperate, I can't tell you. By the way, the Neferutari family is one of the 20 people who established the world government. One of the families, I know a lot of news." Hearing this, even the ant was slightly surprised, not to mention Perospero, Katakuri, and Smoothie at the same table. They originally thought they would have a meal with Air and then talk about marriage. It's best if he agrees. If he doesn't agree, then there will be a fight. Who knows how a good meal can lead to government secrets? And I didn't expect that this kid is one of the descendants of the creator. What the hell is this? In fact, Air can probably guess the reason why Aunt invited him. Apart from making desserts, what Auntie loves most is giving birth to children and marrying people. Inviting him here is nothing more than fancying his own strength and wanting to marry him. Excluding Aunt's personal participation in the battle, Air is still capable of marrying her daughters. To accept. In addition, Air also wants to bring the Big Mom pirates into the water and increase his knowledge of world government. So let's just tell some of the government's secrets. When the government knows about it later, everyone will. Mom can't even regret it. Well, I am also willing to cooperate with you, but let's talk about the government first. I am more interested in this. Taking the bait, Air's lips curved into a smile. How should I say it? Well, let's just talk about what the government is most afraid of. Air gave up and looked at the people present and asked, "Do you know what the great secret treasure in Raftel is?" Big secret treasure. Katakuri and the others swallowed their saliva. Regarding this legendary treasure of the Pirate King, they had only heard from Big Mom that it existed, but they really didn't know what it was. "I don't know either," snapped. "Asshole, are you kidding us?" Smoothie slammed the table and stood up, roaring angrily. "Don't worry, I haven't finished speaking yet." Air comforted her, and Perospero and others quickly grabbed her, and Smoothie sat down angrily. Air cleared his throat and continued. "Although I don't know what's in it specifically, I'm sure it contains the key to overthrowing the government and records the blank 100 years of history." The ant listened quietly, her eyes flickering, and she didn't know what she was thinking. Smoothie couldn't hold himself back and asked curiously, "I remember that O'Hara was erased by Buster Call because he was studying the historical text. What exactly happened in this void century?" Air spread his hands and said helplessly, "If I knew, I would have announced it long ago. The only thing I know is that a huge country was overthrown thousands of years ago, and then the world government replaced it, and this country is related to the D family." Quote. D. Several people muttered for a while, remembering many strong men with D in their names. Before they could think too much, Air continued, "There is another secret. The 5 elders are not the real rulers of the world government. There is someone above them." Enough. Before Air could finish speaking, he was interrupted by his aunt. Her bloodshot eyes stared at Air fiercely, and she asked coldly, "Air boy, tell us so much, what do you want to do? If what you say today is leaked, it is estimated that tomorrow Sengoku and Garp will lead the Marine 3 Admiral to bring peace to all nations." Air shrugged, and under the vigilant gazes of Katakuri and others, he continued to pick up the food on the table and started eating, while saying vaguely, "Don't we need to cooperate? As allies, we should share information with each other. Moreover, in this case, our alliance can be closer, right?" The ant looked at Air, who was eating the delicious food calmly, and the expression on her face suddenly changed. She smiled and said, "Well, you're right, let's talk about cooperation. You should know my rules. Tell me, you want to marry my daughter?" Sure enough, Air sighed and stopped moving. With tears in his eyes, he pointed at the person he had taken a liking to and said, "It's her." Auntie and Katakuri followed his fingers and looked down, only to see Charlotte Garrett sitting with a few sisters, chatting and laughing. As the 18th daughter of the Charlotte family, she is 27 years old this year. The reason why Air fell in love with her was simple. Not only was she one of the few normal people in Charlotte's family, she was also tall and beautiful. Garrett, Auntie yelled, making Garrett, who was chatting with her sisters, tremble all over. She turned around nervously and saw her aunt waving to her with a very happy expression, then she walked over carefully. Mom, what's the matter with calling me? The aunt smiled and asked the homies soldiers to bring a chair and put it down next to Air, gesturing for her to sit down. Garrett watched the legendary Air sit down carefully and looked at the aunt in confusion. Well, Garrett, I have some good news for you. You will be Air's wife from now on. What? She was about to say something, but when she saw the aunt's face darken, she had to swallow her words and nodded in agreement. Okay Mom, I understand. Seeing her reluctant look, Air said unhappily. Hey, am I so annoying to you? If nothing else, there are not many people in this world who can surpass me in terms of looks alone. Garrett looked at him. Although Air praised himself as very narcissistic, he was indeed right. Air is tall, strong and well-proportioned. His facial features are sharp and angular, masculine yet handsome. Wearing an iconic white suit also well supports his temperament. After looking at her for a long time, Garrett suddenly felt that having such a powerful and handsome husband was not impossible. As she thought about it, she blushed inexplicably. Air looked at her and was very satisfied. He thought Garrett was the most beautiful in the Charlotte family. And judging from the anime, although she is a bit arrogant, she looks down on people with low strength. But she cares about her family and will worry about her sister Lola's safety when she hears the news. When Katakuri was rescued, she would cry and thank him pitifully. Overall she has a pretty good personality and is a bit cute. Seeing her daughter was satisfied, the aunt was even happier. After she stood up and attracted everyone's attention, she opened her hands and announced loudly. Children, the fire dragon Air has agreed to marry your sister Garrett, prepare for a lively wedding. When everyone heard the news, they were stunned at first, and then overjoyed. They stood up and shouted, celebrating that the Charlotte family had a powerful ally. Air didn't hesitate, he directly took Garrett's little hand and stood up, happily waving to everyone to express his gratitude. I'm so lucky, I got an ally and got a beautiful wife for free. Garrett was a little shy, and after struggling for a few times without breaking free, she let him pull her. Looking at Air's handsome profile, she gradually lost her mind. Seeing this, Katakuri and Perospero looked at each other and clapped their hands to send blessings to Garrett. Anyway, they couldn't stop their mother's decision, and Garrett seemed quite satisfied. As for whether Air would bully her, Katakuri vowed that if Air did so, even if he was not Air's opponent, he must let him know how powerful he was. So, after discussing with his aunt, Air temporarily stayed at Cake Island, waiting for the wedding to start in 10 days. On the other side, Morgans and other underground world bosses also received the news from Big Mom and started rushing to Cake Island. Then, the next day, Naval Headquarters. Sengoku slapped the newspaper on the table angrily and shouted loudly, "Asshole Air, first he contacted the Revolutionary Army, and now he is marrying the 4 Emperor's mother, what exactly does he want to do?" In the office, Granny He was sitting on the sofa, drinking tea calmly. She looked at Sengoku who was getting angry again, and said helplessly, "It's useless for you to be angry. With Thunder Fruit and Lion Fruit, there's nothing we can do about him." Sengoku gets even angrier when he mentions this. During this period, Air put a lot of garbage in the Holy Land, polluting the entire Holy Land with a stench. The 5 elders have given a death order to find this kid and gather all their troops to eliminate him in one fell swoop. He even warned him that if he couldn't catch Air, he should stop being a marshal and go home as soon as possible to retire. Sengoku was furious at that time. If the government hadn't done this, Air wouldn't have left, and Akainu wouldn't have lost an arm. And they killed Air. Marine TM didn't even know where the others were, what the hell did they catch? What a bullshit marshal, he doesn't care, just do whatever you like. If it hadn't been for a group of Marine executives to stop him, Sengoku would have gone to the smelly Holy Land to submit his resignation letter. Thinking of this, Sengoku scolded the 18th generation of the 5 elders' ancestors again in his heart, then sighed helplessly and threw the newspaper away and ignored it. Meanwhile, New World, Wano-kuni, Onigashima. After reading today's newspaper, Kaido of the Beasts angrily smashed the wine gourd on the ground and roared. Old woman Linlin, she dared to take the lead and recruit the fire dragon. Laozi is going to kill her and get the fire dragon back. After saying that, Kaido waved his mace and started destroying everywhere. Seeing this, the other minions of the beast group fled in all directions, fearing that if the boss was unhappy, he would be beaten to death with the stick. Ignoring the drunken boss, Yan Quanjin took the newspaper and read it carefully. After a while he raised his head and comforted Kaido. Brother Kaido, don't be angry. It just said that Fire Dragon and Big Mom were married, but it didn't say that he became Big Mom's subordinate. It is impossible for a man like Shang Hualong to surrender to others. Quote. Another big sign, Disaster Quinn, also smoked a cigarette and echoed. That's right, Boss Kaido, after all, it's just a marriage. Don't you also have a daughter? You might as well let them get married. Daughter, do I have one? The drunk Kaido rubbed his head and thought for a long time, and finally thought of it with a slap on his thigh. By the way, where is my idiot son, no, my idiot daughter, Yamato? Hey, where is Inawato over there? Speaking of Yamato, Kaido forgot where this fool girl had been thrown by him for a moment, and quickly asked the men on the side. Men, look at me and I'll look at you. Regarding this daughter whom Kaido didn't pay much attention to, his subordinates really didn't know where she was for a while. I don't know what I'm doing standing here. Why don't you go find it quickly? Kaido looked at them and couldn't help but yelled. The frightened men quickly ran away to find Master Yamato. Oh no, it was Miss Yamato. After all his men left, Kaido showed a satisfied expression, took a few more sips of wine, and happily let Jin prepare the boat. Calm Belt, Amazon Lily Kingdom. Empress Boa Hancock looked at today's newspaper, clutching her heart in pain and fell down. Her two sisters and the rest of the palace saw this and hurriedly gathered around. Sister, what happened? Are you feeling unwell? Go call a doctor quickly. Everyone was angrily concerned, but Hancock ignored it. Instead, he looked at the title of the newspaper and touched it tightly. The man I like is about to get married. I am so unwilling. When she thought of this, her heart became even more sad, and she couldn't help but cry out softly. It feels so uncomfortable. The two younger sisters became even more anxious when they saw her situation, and hurriedly hugged her to the bed. The second sister, Sandersonia, was very anxious when she saw her sister in pain. After giving some advice to the third sister, Marigold, she planned to go find a doctor. Wait a moment. At this moment, Gloriosa, the former emperor of Amazon Lily known as Grandma Z, stopped her. After driving away everyone except the sisters, she came to Hancock's bedside and picked up the newspaper. The marriage between Fire Dragon Heir and Charlotte Garrett, the 18th daughter of the Big Mom Pirates. So it turns out that she got sick because she couldn't accept it when she saw the man she loved marrying someone else, right? Grandma Yi read the newspaper and said to Hancock word for word. Nani? The two sisters suddenly. He was shocked and looked at Hancock lying on the bed in disbelief. He couldn't believe that his always proud sister had fallen in love with a certain man. Hancock groaned when he was told something important, subconsciously closed his legs and twisted around on the bed sadly. Seeing their sister like this, the two sisters believed it a little, and quickly grabbed the newspaper from mother-in-law Z and read it carefully. Fire Dragon Heir. It's this man. It turns out it was him, so that makes sense. As sisters, they know best that the biggest psychological shadow of the three of them is the days when they were slaves to the celestial dragons. This is a painful memory that the master can't help but tremble when he thinks about it. But suddenly one day, a man not only attacked the Holy Land, but also directly killed more than one celestial dragons. This behavior was simply unimaginable to the three women. The two sisters Heir and Sandersonia had admiration, but Hancock was different. She fell immediately after she saw the news. Originally, she was looking forward to the scene when the two met for the first time, but who would have thought that Heir would marry someone else? She couldn't bear this anymore, and she became jealous until she got sick. Looking at the painful sister, the two sisters didn't know what to do and could only look at the mother-in-law. Grandma Z sighed. walked to Hancock's bedside and began to comfort her, but she couldn't help but think of Amazon Lily's previous emperors. Destiny always goes back and forth like this. Is this the fate of Amazon Lily? Meanwhile, Alabasta is a different scene. Although the citizens were surprised after seeing this news, they were mostly happy. In their opinion, His Highness Heir is powerful and handsome, so it doesn't matter if he has more wives. What's more, the marriage with the famous Four Emperors pirate group also made Alabasta a powerful ally. But what they didn't know was that there was already a turmoil in the palace at this time. Heir, I must kill him. Calm down, Sister Ain, don't be impulsive. They are still in New World, it's too late to rush there now. Vivi hugged the angry Ain and persuaded her earnestly. It's so pitiful that as the fiancée, she should be the one who is the most angry, but now she is trying to persuade others not to be angry. HMPH, this insatiable fool, I knew he would definitely get involved with women outside. Hey, Hina, Reiju, you guys should say a few words too. Nasha complained loudly, looked at the two silent guys aside and complained. The two pink hairs took a puff of smoke simultaneously and blew out a smoke ring. It doesn't matter, Hina doesn't care. Yeah, me too. Seeing the two of them looking so leisurely, Ain, who was still aggressively looking for Heir just now, ran up to them and shouted loudly. Heir is about to marry a wild woman outside, why are you still so leisurely? And Reiju, don't be like Hina. Looking at Ain who was approaching, Hina pinched her little face and said unhappily, what do you mean by imitating me? Pay attention to your attitude towards your sister. Really, she was so cute in Marine Academy, why did she become like this? Quote. After saying that, Hina let go of her hand and looked at the people in the room while holding a cigarette and continued. There's no point in rushing now. He's far away in New World. Do you want to fly over with fluttering wings? Besides, you should have been prepared for it. With Heir's personality. Jay, doesn't this happen sooner or later? After listening to Hina's words, the women calmed down even though they were still angry. Zhao Shi, let's not talk about others, just take Ain. From the very beginning, we knew about his relationship with Vivi, Nasha, Hina, and then Ju and this woman from the Charlotte family. In fact, she has already acquiesced to Heir's behavior, but she still gets angry every time. Thinking of Ain, he clenched his fists and said, Sisters, I have decided that I will give him a good lesson after he comes back. Who among you will join me? Vivi and Nasha looked at each other and raised their hands directly. Add me one, count me in two. Reiju also smiled and raised her hand. Although she usually looked indifferent, it is impossible to say that she had no idea at all. Now only Hina remained silent, and everyone looked at her. Hiss, who? Don't look at me, Hina has wanted to do this for a long time. However, Heir did not realize that he was at the center of the topic at this time. Instead, he lived on Cake Island with peace of mind, taking Garrett shopping, chatting, and cultivating feelings every day. Time flies by and the wedding day comes soon. Heir, who was getting married for the first time in his 2 lives, was still very excited. He paced back and forth in the room, standing in front of the mirror from time to time to adjust his clothes. Click, hearing the sound of the door opening, Heir looked back and suddenly froze on the spot. Well, so beautiful. Today, Garrett applied a little makeup, her face was flushed and shy, and her red lips were plump and bright, like a red crystal, exuding an alluring luster. Wearing a white waistband wedding dress, the slender and tender girl held a bouquet of flowers in her arms. Her pink curly hair is covered with a white veil and hangs naturally on her shoulders. With her long, fair and slender legs, and the jailer wearing white high heels, the whole person is pure and charming. Noticing that Heir had been staring at her, Garrett was a little shy. She subconsciously looked away, and her white jade-like little hands were tightly entangled together, showing her inner confusion. Seeing her actions, Heir also reacted. He came to her side with a smile on his face, took her hand and said, "From today on, we are husband and wife." "Yeah, I know." After speaking, Garrett lowered her head and was silent for a while before speaking again. "Why did you choose me? Sister Smoothie is better than me in terms of strength and appearance. If you choose her, your mother will definitely agree." Heir smiled, hugged her tightly, and whispered, "There are so many reasons. I fell in love with you at first sight among the crowd. Only your temperament and charm attracted me the most. If I have to say it, it was love at first sight. Looking up at the man she was about to spend the rest of her life with, Garrett felt mixed emotions in her heart. He said he liked her, but after all, this was a forced arrangement by her mother and she was a stranger she had only known for a few days. Speaking of being annoying, Air is top-notch in terms of appearance and strength, and she has no reason to dislike her. Looking at Garrett, who was silent, Air didn't say anything more. It's better to leave feelings to settle slowly over time. Hey, we are still talking about love. The wedding is about to start. The guests have already arrived. An unexpected voice suddenly broke the warm atmosphere and forced its way in. Air followed the sound and saw a woman with pink hair and a panda decoration on her head, looking at them playfully with her arms folded. Koval, what are you talking about? Who is talking about love? Hey, sister, hurry up and leave, otherwise the guests will be impatient to wait. Bovar, the twin sister of Garrett 747, said with a smile. Garrett wanted to say something else, but was interrupted by a sudden slap on the butt, and she stiffly held her words in her mouth. Okay Garrett, now that the guests have arrived, it's time for us to set off. Boval, please lead the way. Hee, no problem, brother-in-law. After saying that, she made a face at Garrett, turned around and jumped to lead the way for the two of them. Air glanced at Garrett, whose cheeks were flushed, and led her to follow. When the three of them came to a gate, Poar stopped, stepped aside to get out of the way, and said with a smile, I brought it here. I wish you a happy wedding. After saying that, the two homies soldiers at the door opened the door, and a dazzling beam of sunlight came in. Air nodded to Bovar, turned to look at Garrett, and met her eyes. The two of them smiled sweetly at the same time, and walked into the venue together. The two walked hand in hand on the red carpet. When the guests saw the groom and the bride, they consciously came to both sides of the road and applauded to send blessings to the two newlyweds. Even the aunt was in a good mood, smiling and standing up to applaud. Air smiled and waved in response as he walked, but among the enthusiastic guests, he saw an annoying figure at a glance. Morgans took a camera phone and excitedly took photos of the two of them, mumbling incessantly. Great, great, the wedding of Air, the God-Slayer Fire Dragon, and the 18th daughter of the Charlotte family, this is big news. Absolutely big news. Just when he was so excited that he couldn't control himself, the beautiful woman next to him clapped and said, Morgans, is this okay? The way Mr. Air looks at you is wrong. Gah, Morgans stopped taking pictures. He put down the phone and looked at Air, only to see that he was looking at him with a smile, but in his smile, Morgans always felt a chill. He took back the phone in a sullen voice, awkwardly stretched out his two chicken wings and clapped his hands in celebration for Air. He remembered very clearly that Air had sent a letter to the World Economic News headquarters. The words contained a lot of obscenities and strong murderous intent. Snort. Air snorted coldly. Considering that today was his wedding, he let this birdie go for the time being. Soon after the two people walked the red carpet, they came to stand in front of a large cake more than 10 meters high. A man dressed as a priest stepped forward and stood between them. With a slight cough, the priest motioned for the two to stand facing each other, then took out a Bible and waited for them to put their hands on it, then looked at Air and said, Mr. Air, no matter poverty, illness, difficulty, or pain, are you willing to never leave Miss Garrett and love her for the rest of your life? I do. Well, the priest nodded and looked at the tomb again and said, Miss Garrett, no matter poverty, illness, difficulty, or pain, are you willing to never leave Mr. Air and love him for the rest of your life? Garrett also nodded and said without hesitation, I do. Priest, in the name of God, I declare you officially married. Now please exchange tokens. After the words fell, the two children, a boy and a girl who had been arranged for a long time, walked forward holding two diamond rings. Air took the ring and took Garrett's little hand to put it on for her. But at this moment, the sky suddenly became gloomy, and thunder sounded in my ears. Air's hand holding the ring paused, and his eyes flashed red as he looked towards the horizon of the chosen place. What's wrong? Garrett looked at Air's serious expression and asked confused. Nothing, it's just that a nasty guy showed up uninvited. Air smiled and shook his head and put the ring on her. Although Garrett didn't know who he was talking about, she still instinctively felt that something bad had happened. Stop thinking about it and exchange rings quickly. Air reminded, interrupting her random thoughts. But just as she was about to put a ring on Air, a shout stopped her in her tracks. Wait a minute for Lousy. A roar with Conqueror's sound swept across the audience, and most of the guests and the children of the Charlotte family covered their ears in pain. The aunt, who had noticed it a long time ago, looked at the sky with blood-red eyes. The captain's hat on her head had turned into a broadsword in her hand, and a domineering slash flew into the sky with her roar. Asshole Kaido, get out of here. Air also cursed in his heart, grabbed Garrett's little hand and put on the ring on his own, then protected her behind him and breathed out. Sao, your uncle's Kaido, if you dare to ruin Lousy's wedding, you will die. The roar of the thunder flame dragon. The slashes and breaths tore through the thick clouds one after another, and struck higher. In the sky, Kaido in the form of a blue dragon felt the incoming attack, laughed and opened his mouth wide, and also responded with a breath of heat. 3 powerful attacks collided together, instantly dispersing the poison around them. Kaido, who was still breathing, suddenly raised his eyebrows. The old woman's attack was not bad, it was still familiar to him. But something was wrong with this fire dragon boy. He found that his heat breath was gradually being pushed back. Feeling interesting, he immediately increased his strength, wanting to see how much this kid who was in the limelight recently could do. Air, who also felt that Kaido's force was not weak at all, moved his hand back and let Garrett push it away. He stopped breathing, quickly transformed into a 10-meter-tall human-animal form, took a deep breath, exhaled a bold breath from Daojiatai, and began to wrestle with Kaido. Anti's slashing attack has dissipated, and now there are only 2 beams of light, one up and one down. The light beam, which was fused with flames of tens of thousands of degrees high temperature and electric current of 1 billion volt, pushed back against Kaido's hot breath at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon Kaido couldn't bear it any longer, and the roar of the thunder flame dragon hit him hard, causing a violent explosion. It's so exciting. The battle between the fire dragon and the beasts, didn't you expect that the fire dragon had the upper hand? What a big news. News geek Morgans danced excitedly and kept taking photos of the 2 of them. The others also recovered from the Conqueror's roar just now. Charlotte Owen looked at Air standing proudly, with a drop of cold sweat appearing on his forehead. The attack just now reminded him again of the scene a year ago when he was hit by the same beam of light and almost died. And what surprised him even more was that judging from the momentum of this attack, it was obviously more terrifying than a year ago. Today, 5 people including Owen and Dafu once again recalled the fear of being dominated by Air. Oh, hello, Fire Dragon Brat, you are pretty good. Come and join Lousy's pirate group, I can give you a spot on the big billboard. Following the words, Kaido, who was unharmed, turned into a human form and fell from the sky. Ah, a big sign. If I were asked to be the captain of Beast's pirates, I would consider it. Don't show that bullshit big sign to embarrass people. Air also released his human-animal form, looked at him with a fool's eyes, and refused with disdain. At this time, the ant also came to him. She glared at Kaido and roared angrily. Kaido, you kid, do you want to ruin my marriage plan? Old woman Linlin, I'm not interested in your bullshit marriage. Lousy's goal is the fire dragon brat. Kaido didn't even look at his aunt, he kept looking at Air with admiration in his eyes. Seeing his attitude, the ant who felt insulted angrily pulled out Napoleon and wanted to fight with him. At this moment, Katakuri stood in front of Big Mom. He saw something with his ability to predict the future and said, Mom, please wait a moment, this matter is getting complicated. The ant stopped moving and looked at him doubtfully. Before she could ask, another pterosaur flew from the sky. The pterosaur quickly flew in front of Air, released its claws, and threw a woman tied tightly with sea stone to his feet. Brother Kaido, we are not here to fight today. Don't forget our purpose. Jin landed next to Kaido and spoke calmly. Air, who can also predict the future, looked at the familiar woman twisting at his feet, and suddenly his expression became strange. Fire Dragon Kid, this is my daughter Yamato. I will marry her to you. How about marrying her to Lousy? Question mark question mark question mark question mark question mark. Everyone present was shocked by Kaido's words, and Morgans, the Birdman, was even more excited. He started twitching, rolled his eyes, and passed out happily. Even though Air had predicted it, He still looked at Kaido with an expression of, "Are you kidding me? Sao, what's going on? Can my wife still get one for each wife? Or is it free shipping and delivered directly to your door? Stop joking. I'm a man. How could I marry another man?" Yamato was thrown to the ground like a bug, twisting desperately, and loudly refuted Kaido's words. Everyone looked at her perfect figure that was completely exposed due to being tied up, and silently raised questions. "Hey, eldest sister, do you want to look in the mirror? Who would believe you when you say you are a man?" Kaido ignored Yamato, but looked at Air and asked, "How about Fire Dragon Brat, what's your answer?" "The answer? You have already delivered it to my door. If I don't want it, I would be a fool." But thinking that today was his wedding and Garrett was watching from the side, he couldn't agree directly. Moreover, Air secretly glanced at the ant's face, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and said, "I don't care, but this requires the consent of my new mother-in-law, don't you think so, Ms. Linlin?" Only then did everyone watching the show remember that it was Ant's daughter's wedding to Air, and now that Kaido was interfering, Ant must have been furious. But what Auntie did next made everyone stunned. "Okay, I agree." The ant smiled and said something that shocked everyone. She happily opened her hands and said to Kaido, "In this case, let's hold a wedding for them together and form a three-family alliance directly." Hey, you just agreed to fight, and you agreed to fight. Why don't you follow the routine? What the confused Air didn't understand was that the ant never thought about her daughter's happiness. In her opinion, as long as the purpose of the marriage is achieved and strong allies are gathered, her daughter's opinions and thoughts are not important. Now I can marry a daughter and form an alliance with Air and Kaido at the same time. How can I let go of such a good thing of making a lot of money so easily? Oh, I knew you wouldn't object, Linlin. No problem, Lousy agreed to the alliance. Kaido laughed out loud. As his younger brother and rival who has known Big Mom for decades, he was very familiar with Big Mom. He had already guessed that Big Mom would agree. Seeing that none of the parents objected, the bargain-hunting Heir was certainly not ignorant, so he had no choice but to accept a wife. I also agreed. Will the three families form an alliance? This is really interesting. The three of them looked at each other and laughed happily. Well. Oh. Ha 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 ha. Morgans, who didn't know when he woke up, forced himself to hold up his upper body and took a photo of the scene with trembling hands. Then he completely fainted and fell to the ground, leaving tears of happiness. God bless the news, this must be the blessing brought by my daily good deeds. This is super big news. Stussy was also shocked by the current scene. Unexpectedly, such a shocking event happened before his eyes. The rest of the underground world bosses were also secretly frightened, thinking that Vice Admiral Air's weight had once again increased, placing him on the same level as the four emperors, or even higher. The ants' children are even more happy. For them, having another four emperors as an ally is like Qin Shi Huang's biggest win. As for today's other protagonist Garrett, although she felt a little disappointed, she still accepted it and was happy that her family and her husband had a new powerful ally. As a result, a wedding for two people inexplicably turned into a wedding for three people. Although Yamato was not wearing a wedding dress and her hands and feet were tied with sea stones, the wedding still started despite her struggle. But what Air didn't expect was that Kaido, an old father who always ignored Yamato, seriously handed a pair of rings to Air's hand during the wedding. Although Air felt that Jin should have prepared this in advance, he still took it seriously. Even Yamato was quiet for a moment. Didn't recruit Fire Dragon, and Devin the annoying Yamato is given away. Was he drunk just now? Air complained, but still solemnly put the ring on Yamato, and whispered to her. Isn't this good? Stay away from your father, and you can see this vast sea with me soon. Yamato was shocked and gradually became quiet. She couldn't help but get excited when she thought about her long-held wish to go out to sea for adventure. Really, will you take me out to sea? Thank you, although I am a man, I recognize you as my husband. Air's head is full of black lines. Why the hell did you say this? It's so weird. Garrett also looked at Kaido's daughter curiously. She really couldn't figure it out. Yamato was obviously a woman no matter how she looked, so why did she always think of herself as a man? Could it be that she was not very smart? The priest appeared again, and this time Yamato cooperated a lot. The wedding of the three was quickly concluded, and the guests began to celebrate lively. Air held one hand and led the two brides to the main table to sit down. Auntie and Kaido also sat next to each other. Each of them is flanked by his own capable subordinate. Kaido is flanked by Jin, and Big Mom is naturally Katakuri. In addition to them, there are 6 kings of the underground world including Urs and Stussy at this table. After sitting down, Air asked Kaido for the key to Yamato's chain. Kaido signaled, and Jin immediately threw the key to Air. After catching it, Air opened the Shikai lock directly for Yamato. Kaido saw his actions and couldn't help but said, "Do you want to untie it? This fool little girl will run away." Air didn't pay attention. After untying the sea stone chain, he said, "Don't worry, I've already made an agreement with Yamato. She won't run away, right?" The chain was untied. Yamato moved his wrist, glared at Kaido fiercely, nodded and promised, "I think I will do what I say." After saying that, she picked up the food on the table and ate it hungrily. After Air got some more food for Garrett, he poured a glass of wine and said, "Since we are allies, I will speak frankly. Mr. Kaido, I heard that Wano Kuni is rich in sea stone. I hope to buy some from you. Of course, if you two need anything, I will try my best to get it for you." Quote. Kaido nodded and agreed to this request without thinking about it. Wano Kuni didn't do much else, but Seastone felt that it was enough. As for the nonsense that this is provided to the world government and cannot be sold to others, Kaido will definitely use a mace to tell him that he can sell his stuff to whoever he wants. And he didn't pay much attention to the second half of Air's words. In his opinion, Air could only be recognized by his strength, and he really didn't like anything else. Even the ant on the side didn't react much after hearing his words. But at this moment, Katakuri, who had been silent all this time, suddenly looked up at him. "Air, the gold mine you gave to your mother before was brought from the sea, right? Then you must have a lot of other resources, such as the most widely used iron ore." Air smiled and nodded, "Yes, the seabed is rich in resources and unexplored. Except for sea stone, I only found a few bits and pieces, but I have no shortage of resources. As for iron ore, not to mention the sea, even now I can pull down a stony iron meteorite from space. How do you want to see it?" Space. Morgans and others all looked up at the sky and swallowed their saliva. They couldn't imagine how pervert a person must be to pull down a meteorite in space. Auntie and Kaido are much better. After all, they are well informed and have seen a lot of monsters before. Katakuri nodded and said to Air, "In this case, we can still cooperate. After all, we also have many weapons factories. Okay, I will give you a cheap price. We will discuss this in detail later." Air nodded and agreed. After hearing their conversation, Kaido and Jin looked at each other, and then Yujin said, "Our main industry is arms. If you can provide cheap raw materials, that would be great." "These are all trivial matters," Air waved his hand and agreed. At this time, Umit, the king of shipping who had been listening in the background, could not sit still. Thinking of Air's inexhaustible and huge resources, Umit trembled with excitement. With this and his own transportation channels all over the world, he seemed to have seen the scene of Jinshan waving to him. While several people stopped talking, he quickly raised his glass and said to Air, "Mr. Air, I have long admired you. I am Umit from the shipping industry. I am very happy to meet you." Hearing him speak, Air knew that the money sender was coming. He put down the tableware calmly, raised his glass and smiled kindly. "Mr. Umit, I have heard of the name of King of Shipping for a long time. Thank you for coming to my wedding today." The two toasted politely and clinked their glasses in the air, and then heard Umit continue, "I just heard Mr. Air say that you have a lot of mineral resources in your hands. I wonder what you are going to do with them." Putting down the wine glass, Air said matter-of-factly, "Except for keeping some for ourselves, of course we will sell the rest. Why does Mr. Umit have any ideas about these minerals?" "Ha ha ha, I am indeed very interested." Umit said straight to the point without beating around the bush. "You know, I have transportation channels all over the world. Instead of wasting time and energy on finding buyers for transactions, it is better to leave these trivial matters to me. Whether it's the government or the Revolutionary Army, any trouble you don't need will be solved by me as an agent." Quote. Hearing these words, Air's lips curved into a smile. He waved to the attendant to pour him another glass of wine. He raised his glass and said with a smile, "Then I'm sorry to trouble you. I wish us a happy cooperation. A pleasure to work with." After negotiating a deal, Air was in a good mood. He would have a drink with Kaido and talk about life with his aunt. Finally, he came to Stussy and said drunkenly, "Miss Stussy, I met an acquaintance of yours 3 years ago." Stussy's eyebrows were crooked, and she asked with a curious smile, "Really? I don't know who it is." Air burped, moved a chair to sit next to her and whispered, "It's Miss Bargain, you're familiar with it, right? 3 years ago, she met Teacher Zephyr and me with the guy who claimed to be Whitebeard's son. Edward Weeble, that's really a monster. Do you think he is really Hubert's son?" Stussy's smile was slightly stiff. She didn't understand why Air asked this, but Kaido was still elegant. "I don't know, maybe. I thought you knew. After all, you have a close relationship with Miss Ba Jin, right, first." He mouthed the last few words. But Stussy understood. Her whole body froze instantly, and her heart was filled with turmoil. In her eyes, Air seemed to be shrouded in fog and full of mysteries. She is number one because she is the scientific team led by Vegapunk and the first successful product of the Mads cloning experiment. And Miss Ba Jin is her mother body. It stands to reason that this news is a top secret that only a few people know, but who knows that Air is a time traveler? Through the plot, he not only has the intelligence advantage of foresight, but also knows most of the unknown secrets in the world. Looking at Stussy, who was stunned on the spot, Air smiled and did not have a deep conversation with her. Instead, under her complicated eyes, he turned around and wandered to Garrett and Yamato, pulling them from the chair. "Rise. Let's go back to sleep." Yamato, who was not yet full, threw away Air's hand, grabbed various pastries and crazily stuffed them into his mouth, and said, "Wait a minute, the cake here is so delicious, let me finish it." Garrett took the initiative to support the somewhat drunk Air and asked with concern, "How are you, do you feel okay?" Looking at Garrett, who immediately became a good wife and mother after getting married, and looking at Yamato, who stuck his butt out and ate like a pig, Air couldn't help but get furious. He smiled gently at Garrett, turned around and grabbed Yamato's collar coldly, dragging her back. "Come on, follow me back to the house." Wait a minute. No matter how much Yamato thumped, Air didn't let go. Just like that, under the watchful eyes of the aunt and Kaido, he took their daughter back to the house. "Kaido, Auntie, sending away a disobedient, weak daughter in exchange for a powerful ally, I will make a profit this time." Back in the house, Air let go of his hands on his hips, but he still looked a little drunk. "Yamato, today is our wedding day, are you planning to eat out all night?" Yamato, whose clothes were a little messy due to the struggle, and whose chest leaked a little bit of spring, collapsed weakly on the ground and said sadly, "This is the first time I've eaten such delicious food. I'm not full yet. No, now is not the time to think about eating." Yamato sat up suddenly, as the mountain shook under the force. She looked at Air excitedly and said, "Am I free now? When will we go to see? Where is Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world? I want to see him." And, Air rubbed his temples and had a headache from the noise, but he couldn't help but speak. Stop talking. You are still one step away from Kaido's clutches. Let's wait until you do." Yamato was stunned and asked in confusion, "Why? Aren't we married? Do you want to leave me?" "Hey, what do you mean by your tone of questioning the heartless man? Really, Garrett, you should take her to take a bath first." Air rubbed his head and said to Garrett beside him. Garrett's face turned red. Knowing what was going to happen, she nodded and pushed the aggrieved Yamato to leave. "Let's go, take a shower, and I'll explain it to you." "Wait a minute, I'm a man and I can't take a shower with you." "Hey, let's just treat it as a mixed bath." After Garrett coaxed Yamato away, Air sighed and came to the bedside to light a cigarette. "What the hell is this? A pretty girl, why is she such a fool? When we sleep together later, she won't still call me Yu or something like that, right?" Thinking of this scene, Air got goosebumps all over his body. He angrily threw the cigarette on the ground and stamped it out, swearing in his heart that he would get Yamato's mind back no matter what. After a while, the two women wearing bath towels came back. Garrett shyly came to Air and sat down next to him, while Yamato threw the towel carelessly and landed it on the bed with a flying swoop. After rolling back and forth for a few times to feel comfortable, she stood up and looked at Air curiously and asked, "What is the last step?" Garrett said. "Let's do it quickly, and I will be free after it is done." Hiss. Take a deep breath and look at the naked body. Yamato. Air grabbed her hand and said with a dry mouth. "I will do it without you asking." "Huh, what are you doing?" "Wait a minute, this is a little weird." The night passed like this, and Air didn't get up until noon the next day. After covering them with quilts, he carefully left the room. After leaving the room, Air went to the place where Charlotte family members usually gather, and saw that most of the people were still lying on the floor, sleeping soundly. Needless to say, these guys must have formed another party after the wedding yesterday and drank all night long. "Hey, brother-in-law Air. You finally got up. I thought you wouldn't come out until night." Air looked back, only to find that it was Pudding sitting in the corner greeting him. Looking at the people still lying on the corpses, Air walked over. "It's little Pudding. You should say this to Garrett. She is the one who likes to sleep until night." Pudding, who is only 10 years old this year, did not understand the profound meaning of Air's words, so he just talked with his brother-in-law who was very kind to him. "I have no other thoughts about Pudding Air. I just happened to see her alone a few days ago, so I kindly walked over to chat with her." Even if he accidentally saw her third eye, he didn't show any disgust. This moved Pudding, who had always been ridiculed and disliked by others, and the two naturally became friends. After chatting with Pudding for a while, others woke up one after another. Everyone saw that Air no longer had the initial fear, so they naturally gathered together and started chatting. Looking at this group of Charlotte family members who look different but have a harmonious relationship, Air couldn't help but wonder, if it weren't for a caring brother like Katakuri, would these brothers and sisters be able to have the harmony and friendship they have now? Shaking his head and not thinking about anything else, Air inserted himself into a few people and chatted with some of them. After staying at Cake Island for a few more days and negotiating business with Katakuri, Jin and Umit, Air planned to leave. On the shore, after waving to Poar, Pudding, Katakuri and others who came to see him off, Air controlled the borrowed boat to rise into the sky and sail away. On the boat, Yamato came to the side of the boat, looked down at the sea below, and shouted excitedly. "It's the sea. I finally went to sea. Air, look, that bird is so strange. And over there, is that sea king's? It's so big." Yamato ran up to Air and hugged him excitedly. "Thank you Air, I am finally free." Fortunately, Air has grown a little taller during this period and reached 2.55 meters. Otherwise, he would have been taken care of by the 2.63-meter Yamato facial cleanser. He broke away from Yamato's arms and looked at Yamato, who was finally looking a little feminine in short-sleeved shorts. He said happily, "Okay, don't be like a child. Now that you've finally come out, I'll take you to a fun place." Yamato took 2 deep breaths to force himself to calm down, then nodded wildly and looked at him expectantly. Air took out a piece of life paper from his body and it said, "Gulam Tesoro," on it. Big news. Big news again. In a certain town, a young man rushed into a local pub with a newspaper. A regular customer of the tavern looked at the visitor and asked curiously, "Pace, what happened again? Why are there always big news lately?" Hoo-hoo. Pace took a few breaths, unfolded the newspaper from his hands, pointed to the title above and said, "It's the Fire Dragon. He has formed an alliance with Charlotte Linlin, the 4 Emperor's mother, and Kaido of the Beasts." Everyone who was originally in high spirits immediately lost interest when they heard it was a fire dragon and continued drinking and bragging. Pace scratched his head strangely when he saw the scene in front of him, and shouted in confusion, "Hey, what's wrong with you? This is a big event." But no one paid any attention to him in the tavern. The person who asked the question just now saw that he was still blocking the door stupidly, so he responded, "Idiot, that's the Fire Dragon Air. Is there not enough big news about him during this time? One day he attacks the Holy Land, and the next he marries the 4 emperors. Even if you told me that he would destroy the world tomorrow, we wouldn't be surprised. Not to mention these ordinary people, even the government is now paralyzed by the big moves Air makes from time to time. Even if the 5 elders heard the news from him, they would just curse a few words angrily and then nothing would happen. What should we do? We can't catch him, and Alabasta is floating somewhere. Even if the government hates Air to the point of itch, there's nothing they can do about him. Compared to the government, Marine is even worse. Sengoku. Air's news. It's none of my business, just pretend you don't know. Single quote. In this way, except for a few thoughtful people, most people are resistant to the news about Air. Even if the government increased his bounty by another 500 million, it did not surprise him. At this time, the three people of Air had already taken a boat and arrived at the sky above the golden ship Yulin Tesoro according to the instructions of the paper of life. Ignoring the incredulous looks of the melon-eating crowds around him, Air controlled the ship to land in the bay in the center of Yulin Tesoro. The moment Air and the two women came out of the cabin, the people around and in the control room who were watching the spacecraft screamed in shock. No, it's the Fire Dragon Air. The Fire Dragon Air who defeated Admiral and attacked the Holy Land. Everyone, run. The God Slayer is coming. Quick, turn the helm. Get out of here quickly. It's too scary. Why is the Fire Dragon coming here? Is Lousy so scary? I ran away as soon as I saw him. Why else am I here? Lousy can't come out to play. Air looked at the fleeing passers-by with a dark look on his face, and couldn't help but feel guilty. Wow, it's so big here. Is this really a ship? Yamato couldn't wait for a long time. As soon as she came out, she jumped onto the shore and looked around excitedly. Air also jumped over with Garrett in his arms. He looked at Yamato angrily like a runaway wild horse and shouted. Did you run so fast with any money on you? Yamato froze in place, touching his pocket that was cleaner than his face. He came over with a smile, consciously hugged Air's other arm, and said, Air, give me some money. I just saw a barbecue cellar there and I want to eat it. Really, what else would you do besides eating? Air complained, but he walked honestly to where she pointed and bought a large portion of barbecue for her. While a few people were wandering around, the people in the control room also reported the news to the upper levels, and finally it came to the ears of the Golden Emperor, Gilder Tezzolo. When he heard that the Fire Dragon Air was coming, even as arrogant as he was, he couldn't help but feel troubled. Regarding this kind of powerful and courageous werewolf, he really doesn't want to provoke him. Especially when the person in the monitoring room reported that in addition to him, the four emperors' aunt and Kaido's daughter mentioned in the newspaper were also here. Could this be a honeymoon? Forget it, let's get rid of him quickly. Quote, with this in mind, he called his right-hand man, the lucky fruit user Bacala, and asked her to entertain Air while he found a place to hide first. When Bakara receives the instructions and finds the target, Air and the others were having fun in the casino. Big, big, big. Woohoo, guessed it right again. Yamato danced in celebration and scooped up a lot of chips on the table into his arms. Several guests at the same table smiled stiffly and praised her good luck against their will. Hee, Garrett, this game is really interesting, do you want to try it too? Yamato handed half of the chips to Garrett and invited him happily. Garrett did not refuse. After spending this time together, the relationship between the two of them became closer. At the same time, she also learned about Yamato's past and her tragic experience of being imprisoned by Kaido for more than 20 years. It also makes her more sympathetic to Yamato. He even acted as an elder and began to popularize various negative aspects of life for her. The two of them started playing happily, while Air looked on with a smile. Aren't Tezzolo going to come out to see me? Are you afraid? He suddenly spoke, and the solid sound just reached the ears of Gukara, who was approaching from behind. Bakura paused, then came to Air with a warm smile. The boss has some things to deal with, so he specially ordered me to come to accompany him. Please forgive me for the poor reception. He curled his lips and glanced at Bakala. After realizing that it was not his cup of tea, Air said nonchalantly. Okay, then you can introduce this place to my wife and take them around. I saw an acquaintance and left first. Quote. After saying that, Air came to Garrett, pointed at Bakura, said a few words, and then turned and left. Bakura opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but when she thought of Air's identity, she swallowed her words and started playing with the two girls honestly. On the other side, Air came to the corner of the casino, where a gambling table was also playing games. Air was standing not far away, quietly looking at a blind uncle at the table. If he read it correctly, isn't this guy the future Marine Admiral, Fujitora? This guy is so rich, how can he come to such a high-end place to gamble? At this time, Yi Xiao didn't notice anyone watching him at all, and all his attention was focused on the gambling table. Big, big, big. Tell me quickly, is it big? As the dice cup fell, Yi Xiao excitedly asked the people around him, but the answers he got disappointed him. 1, 1, 2, little one, I'm sorry guest, you lost again. The croupier smiled and said to Yi Xiao, while also expressing his regret. Then he gambled 8 or 9 times in a row. Air, who was in the distance, could clearly see that the croupier didn't do anything at all, but Yi Xiao could guess wrong every time. Air even wondered if this guy was deliberately choosing the opposite points based on what he saw and what he saw. Otherwise, how could a person's luck be so bad? The croupier almost smiled crookedly. He looked at the big fat sheep in front of him and asked enthusiastically. Guest, do you want to continue? You don't have many chips anymore. Do you want me to change some for you? Yi Xiao gritted his teeth. This was all the reward he received from a wealthy businessman after he rescued him before. If he lost again this time, he would not even have money to eat. What if you lose so many times in a row, you might win the next one? With this mentality of betting on dogs, Yi Xiao pushed the chips in front of him and placed them all on Xiao Shang. Let's start, I can definitely win the next one. 4, 5, 4, big, guest, you lose again. Quote, gambling dog smiled, stood up from his seat in despair, and walked out the door step by step with the croupier's warm greeting. Seeing this, Air finally came over and blocked his way. Mr. Yi Xiao, are you interested in chatting with me? Who are you? Yi Xiao was stunned for a moment, then he opened his eyes with only the whites of his eyes, sensing the confusion of the person in front of him. Air didn't need to answer, the whispers from the surrounding crowd had revealed his identity. When he smiled, his ears moved and he heard the words, Fire Dragon Air. He opened his mouth slightly and looked at Air in surprise and asked. Is it that Fire Dragon? It's an honor for a big man like you to know me. If you want to chat with me, please lead the way. I happen to have some doubts and want to ask your opinion. Confused, although he didn't know what he wanted to ask himself, it would be fine since the purpose was achieved. He called the waiter on the side, and under his guidance, the two found a quiet box and sat together to chat. Mr. Yi Xiao, I have actually heard rumors about you a long time ago. I am very interested in you. I wonder if you have ever thought about joining a certain force. Air poured him a glass of wine and got straight to the point. After thanking him, Yi Xiao did not answer immediately, but thought for a while before speaking. Mr. Air, I actually considered joining Marine before, thinking about contributing to justice. But after hearing about your deeds before, I hesitated. This is exactly what I want to ask, Mr. Air, please tell me what you think of Marine or world government. Marine, Air sighed, remembering the justice coat still hanging in his closet, and sighed. I don't deny that there are indeed many people who are righteous in the Marine, but it is first and foremost a tool for the government to maintain its rule, and secondly, it is a messenger of justice that protects the people. Even the Admiral, Marine's highest combat power, is nothing more than a higher-level bodyguard in the eyes of celestial dragons. Whenever these stupid pigs encounter danger, Admiral must immediately go to support and protect their lives. Not to mention the government, in their view, the world only needs to be under their rule, and the rest does not matter at all. And in order to support the celestial dragons, they require the participating countries to hand over huge amounts of heavenly gold, and the ordinary civilians who are exploited cannot even afford to eat. It is not so much that Roger, the Pirate King, ushered in the era of great pirates and brought chaos to the world, but rather that the government's wanton oppression made the people overwhelmed, and Roger just took the opportunity to light a fire and let the chaos come in advance. Quote, after listening to Air's words, I smiled and fell into deep thought. Recalling the scenes he had seen before, as well as his own eyes that were blinded by his own hands after witnessing too many sins. Yi Xiao sighed and murmured to himself, is there no hope for this world? This world is indeed hopeless, but... Air paused, looked into his eyes and said seriously. But it is precisely because of this that I want to overthrow it and build a new world, a normal world where everyone can have enough to eat. Maybe a few hundred years later, the new world will also be decayed, but no matter how bad it is, it won't be worse than it is now, right? At least Lousy can let these generations live a life without worries about food and clothing. As for the future, let the people in the future solve it. That's what he said, but he is a man who can live forever. Air made no secret of it and spoke out all his ambitions. He sincerely invited Yishao. Mr. Yishao, are you interested in creating a new future with me? Yishao stared at Air blankly, and was shocked speechless by his words. A world where everyone has enough to eat is such a simple and beautiful world. I sighed in my heart, smiled and stretched out my hand with a smile. Please take me with you. Air smiled and clasped his hand. Of course. The two chatted for a long time. Air told Yishao the policies he had implemented in Alabasta over the years, and Yishao also listened attentively. Improve the environment and let demon fruit power plant trees. Well, what an interesting idea. Electric spaceships. Encourage trade. It does boost the economy. Publish education and develop science and technology. Well, I don't know much about science and technology. Can you tell me in detail? The two chatted until the evening, until Garrett and Yamato came over, and then the two talked back. Should come over. He stood up with a satisfied smile. Today's conversation had benefited him a lot. He couldn't wait to do what he could. Mr. Air, during the next period of time, I will travel to various countries to help those who are oppressed and willing to leave to go to Alabasta. Although my gravity fruit is not as convenient as the lion fruit, this little thing is not out of the question. Air also stood up, took out his phone and handed it to him, and said, then it's up to you. I promise you, the future I envisioned will definitely come true. Yishao nodded, smiled at Garrett and the other two, and then turned and left. Suddenly he stopped, turned around awkwardly, scratched his head and said, well, Mr. Air, can you lend me some money? I just lost all my money. Air took out a pile of Baileys and handed it to him with a black streak on his head. He couldn't help but warned, bet less, I don't want to see you lose yourself one day. He smiled awkwardly, smiled and thanked her and left quickly. He could detect the strange looks from other people in the room without looking at him. After he left, Garrett hugged Air's arm and asked curiously, Air, who is he? You look like you are having a great time chatting here. Haha, Air laughed, hugged her into his arms, and said happily. He shouted with a smile. He is a talent I just recruited. Don't look at him like this, but he has strength comparable to Marine Admiral. Hey, Marine Admiral, that blind uncle just now. Garrett covered her mouth and said in surprise. Yamato also opened her mouth slightly. She knew how powerful Admiral was from Odin's notes. She didn't expect that the uncle just now had such strength. The tour guide Bacala who came with her was even more shocked. She didn't think that a big shot like Air would take it for fun. That also proves that the guy who almost lost his pants in their casino really has the strength of Admiral. What day is it today? First there is a monster who defeated Admiral, and then there is a strong man who can rival Admiral. Is it possible that Lord Tezzolo is having bad luck today? Do you want to help him yourself? To replenish your luck, letting go of Garrett, Air asked Yamato with a smile, how was your day? Did you have fun? Yamato kept nodding, holding Air's arm and telling him what he had experienced. Air did not interrupt, smiled and listened to her story, and followed Baccarat back to the bedroom that had been arranged long ago. Since Air hadn't eaten yet, Bacala Wang Jiao of Wang Jiao sent some food over. After the arrangements were made, she left with great discernment. Air originally planned to chat with the two women, eat something, and then go find Tezzolo. But Yamato suddenly pulled him and said with stars in his eyes, Air, let's play games again. Everyone knows what this game is. Faced with the invitation from his beautiful wife, Air immediately forgot about Tezzolo and started the game. A few hours later, Air stroked their smooth jade backs and felt that it was almost time, so he told them about their first embrace. The two girls, who had become dependent on him, agreed without thinking. Air also opened his fangs and performed the first embrace ceremony for the two of them. Soon the two girls turned into succubus forms with red eyes, fangs, pointed ears, and small wings, and even the physical strength they had just lost recovered most of them. Air looked at their new looks with satisfaction and pounced on them again. It was noon the next day. Air ordered some food and served the limp Garrett after eating. He gave a few words of encouragement to the energetic Yamato and disappeared from the room with a flash of light. Yamato curled his lips in displeasure and sat on the edge of the bed to guard Garrett, who had fallen asleep again. Bored, she looked around and suddenly saw the book on the bedside table. 100 Little Secrets That Women Have to Tell. He read the title of the book in a low voice, and Yamato started to read it curiously. This sight completely opened the door to the new world, and Yamato finally realized that this was a woman. Hey, so Air isn't playing games with me at night. There will be a baby like this. Wow, it can still be like this. On the roof, Air, who had a panoramic view of the scene in the room, nodded happily. I don't believe it anymore. A person who can be bent with a broken notebook can't be bent back with 100 books. After confirming that Yamato was diligently learning new knowledge, Air rushed to Tezzolo's location. Golden Tower, inside a luxurious office. Gilder Tezzolo was wearing pink clothes, with his legs crossed, sitting on a chair and listening to the report from his subordinates. After skillfully handling these trivial matters, he stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with a wine glass in his hand, looked at the scenery outside the window and took a delicious sip of red wine. Thinking of Bakara's report yesterday and knowing that Air was calm and not causing trouble, he was convinced that the other party was just here for honeymoon and fun. It's another beautiful day. Sighing, Tezzolo turned around. Then he froze and saw Air sitting on the sofa, shaking his wine glass and looking at him playfully. Hello, Mr. Tezzolo, your office is pretty good. Tezzolo looked at Air, who came to his room at some unknown time, and felt an unknown feeling in his heart as 10,000 grass and mud horses ran past him. He adjusted his mood, sat down opposite Air, and asked Air enthusiastically. Mr. Air, what can I do? After carefully sipping the wine in the glass, Air answered his question with a smile. Nothing, I just heard that Mr. Tezzolo is very rich and I plan to ask you to borrow some money to spend. When Tezzolo heard that he was borrowing money, he breathed a sigh of relief. He was short of everything except money. As a result, Air's next sentence allowed him to break his defense. I don't want much, let's borrow 500 billion belly first. Tezzolo suddenly became angry. He called you sir to give you face. You really think you are a person? If you dare to be so arrogant in my territory, you may not have died before. In an instant, the gold decoration on the sofa moved and tied Air up tightly. His hand was wrapped in golden hockey, and he punched Air in the face without hesitation. Air easily used Lei Yi to financialize the gold and broke free. In the blink of an eye, she came behind him, pulled out the exucuri, put it on his neck, and said, Mr. Tezzolo, you don't want your slave's identity to be known to the celestial dragons, do you? Tezzolo kept pumping his fist and stood there blankly. A drop of cold sweat slid down his cheek. Impossible. This is a secret I haven't told anyone, how could he know it? With the celestial dragon's urinary nature, if they knew that Tezzolo was a slave who escaped from the Holy Land, they would definitely send high-end combat forces to capture him, and then legitimately take his assets as their own. When he thought of this possibility, Tezzolo's killing intent immediately surged, and he turned around and kicked out a whip regardless of the long knife on his neck. Air just covered his waist with armed colors, stood there without moving, and took the blow directly. Seeing that the attack was ineffective, Tezzolo quickly twitched his leg in an attempt to change his attack, but 560 tried several times and couldn't pull his leg back. Air held his calf with one hand, showed his big white face and said with a smile, Don't worry, it's my turn too. Tezzolo's face turned pale, and before he could react, he was lifted upside down. Air used one hand to spin him in circles like a windmill, so fast that even afterimages appeared. After probably a few thousand turns, Air covered Conquerors and slammed him to the ground. Boom! Tezzolo was like a meteor, smashing directly through the entire building from the top office, leaving a large crater dozens of meters deep on the ground. Wow! Vomiting a large mouthful of blood, Tezzolo rolled his eyes and instantly lost consciousness. The huge movement here immediately attracted the attention of others, and a large number of security forces began to pour in. Tezzolo's cadres Bakara, Tanaka, and Deus also hurried over. This is. Bakara and the others came to the entrance of the cave and looked at the figure below, their mouths wide open in disbelief. Mr. Tezzolo, who did this? Tanaka shouted angrily. As a guard of Gulen Tezzolo, he actually had someone beat up the boss at the base camp. This was a serious dereliction of duty. It's me, what, do you have any opinion? Air floated down on the moonwalk, stood in front of several people with his hands in his pockets, and spoke calmly. When they saw the person coming, the three of them immediately shivered. Tanaka quickly bowed down and apologized respectfully, secretly cursing himself for being a fool. I'm sorry, Mr. Air, please forgive me. Baccarat and Day also lowered their heads, not daring to look directly at him. Baccarat doesn't think the three of them will be the opponent of this monster, so let's just wait and see what he plans to do. Deus, who thought he had amazing endurance, was as quiet as a kitten at this time. Although he liked the enemy's powerful attacks, he really didn't dare to say a word when it was the same as seeking death. The three cadres were so frightened that they shut up, not to mention the other soldiers, some of whom had poor psychological quality and were about to urinate at this time. Ignoring them, Air jumped down into the pit on his toes, kicked Tezzolo angrily at the lying corpse, and said, "Don't pretend to be dead. I didn't use all my strength at all. Get up quickly when you wake up. So many people are watching me, don't I want to lose face?" Tezzolo reluctantly sat up while lying on his body, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and called Baccarat to come down and help him. Does this count as keeping a hand? At least half of his ribs were broken, his left hand and left leg were also fractured, and his brain was still a little dazed. It was probably a concussion. Is this the strength, Seth, of the world's top monster? After briefly treating the wound, Tezzolo finally found a room with Air and sat down to chat calmly. 500 billion is too much. It's basically my entire net worth. How about 250 billion? With his left hand hanging on his chest, Tezzolo gritted his teeth and told the price he could bear mentally. Air just looked at him quietly without speaking. 500 billion is your entire worth. Just use this to lie to ghosts. Air won't rest easily if he doesn't squeeze out a little bit of oil and water today. As soon as Tezzolo got angry, the pain from his body forced him to calm down. Phew, I understand, I will pay 500 billion belly equivalent in gold, please give me some time. Not enough. Air crossed his legs and said calmly. This was the previous price, but you refused. Now in addition to the one-time payment of 700 billion belly, you also have to pay 8 billion in protection fees every month. This is your apology for offending me. Tezzolo was about to slap the table and stand up, but when he saw Air's cold eyes and thought that his life was still in his hands, he sat down obediently. I pay. He gritted his teeth and agreed to Air's request with a twisted face. As soon as the words came out of his mouth, his whole body felt as if his strength had been drained, and he went limp. Tezzolo recalled his life, from the humble slave to the super-rich man who is now truly wealthy. In the past, he had everything if he was rich, but today he realized how ridiculous this idea was. In this world, the strong own everything from beginning to end, but for those as weak as him, the only thing waiting for him is to be slaughtered. Looking at Tezzolo, who was looking at the sky and looking suspicious, Air was afraid that something might be wrong with this kid, so he quickly sat next to him and began to comfort him. Don't worry, since you paid the protection fee, we are a family. Seeing that you have given enough, I will give you a gift. I guarantee that you will absolutely love it. Tezzolo was attracted by his words and looked at him suspiciously. Air smiled slightly, quickly transformed into a vampire form, and then bit his neck without waiting for him to react. What did you do to me? Tezzolo exclaimed, covering his neck and looking at Air angrily. Air said nothing and exited the vampire form, holding his chest and quietly waiting for his change. Not long after, the transformation was completed. Tezzolo looked at his extra wings and fangs in horror, and said in disbelief. What's wrong with me? Is this Zone's human animal form? Impossible. I have already eaten the fruit. If I eat it again, I will die. He didn't panic for long. Air smiled and explained his abilities to him. After learning that Air could keep him young and immortal, Tezzolo had to say that his heart was moved. No one can resist the temptation of eternal life, especially a rich man like him. Even though the price was to sell his soul, he couldn't resist the temptation at this moment. Mr. Air, no, Mr. Air, please rest assured that I will definitely provide you with the money on time. Looking at Tezzolo, who showed his loyalty, Air was not stingy. He put a hand on his shoulder and gave him 50 years of life force. Feeling a surge of heat pouring into his body, Tezzolo guessed something and quickly found a mirror, and finally saw his current appearance clearly under the reflection of a knife. You can't go wrong. This is what I looked like when I was 20 years old. I'm really young again. Tezzolo put down the knife, came to Heir excitedly, and bowed to him respectfully. Lord Heir, thank you for your reward. No matter what, please give me your instructions. Seeing Tezzolo's 180-degree change in attitude, Heir smiled with satisfaction. Part of this is because he is greedy for immortality, and the other part is because Heir has control over his bloodline after first embracing him. Even though Haine's children often make sarcastic remarks to her, Dr. Andy also dares to get angry at herself. That's just Heir's special treatment for a few people. If he really wanted to, he could directly control the other party and make the other party a real puppet. After patting him on the shoulder and pulling him to draw some pie for overthrowing the government and killing a few celestial dragons to avenge him, the two came out. Baccarat and the other three were still waiting not far away, anxious in their hearts, praying that the boss would reach an agreement with Heir. Unexpectedly, when the two came out, what they saw was that not only were they talking and laughing, but the boss Tezzolo acted like a younger brother, following Heir as if he was trying to flatter him. When the two of them walked in and looked at the younger boss, before they could ask anything, Tezzolo said, Lord Heir will be our distinguished guest from now on, and his orders are equal to my orders. Do you understand? The three of them looked at each other and agreed. No matter what happens, as long as it is not a fight between life and death. After giving instructions to his subordinates, Tezzolo asked Baccarat to continue taking Heir and his party around, and he would pay for all the expenses. Then he told Heir and went to prepare 700 billion gold. After the big thing was done, Heir also called Garfoot and Yamato and started playing. It has to be said that there are many novelties in Gulen Tesoro, and not only pirates will come here, but also senior officials from Marine and World Government will come to play. Heir met several familiar faces, and he waved to them enthusiastically. When people from the government saw him, they immediately stayed away, while most of Marine's people would still nod in response, but they didn't dare to have too much contact with him. Heir can also understand this. After all, their positions are different and they also have their own considerations. However, it seems that they did not reject him too much, which shows that Marine has begun to disagree with the government. He rubbed his chin, wondering if he should have a good chat with Teacher Zephyr. After playing for 5 days, news finally came from Tezzolo that the gold was ready. Heir also spoke to Garrett and Yamato, telling them to prepare to leave. Garrett had no objection and let Heir decide everything. And Yamato is a little reluctant to leave. She hasn't had enough of all the novelties here, and she doesn't want to leave so soon. Seeing Yamato rubbing himself with the mountain and acting coquettishly, Heir couldn't bear it. Since reading a few more books that Heir brought back to her, Yamato has become more and more like a woman, and has also learned how to use a woman's advantages to act like a coquettish man to get what she wants. After trying it on Heir several times with success, Yin became more convinced of the content in the book. But Heir didn't agree to her this time. He still knew the importance of some things. After comforting Yamato and telling her some other novel things overseas, her attention was immediately diverted and she immediately called Heir to take her away quickly. Heir and Garrett looked at Yamato, who looked like a child in a funny way. After packing up their things, they headed to a secret port under the leadership of Baccarat. Arriving at the destination, Heir nodded with satisfaction as he looked at the golden-looking ship. This little brother knew how to do things, and he also knew how to prepare a luxurious ship for his elder brother. The three of them boarded the deck, and Tezzolo immediately greeted them. Lord Heir, everything is ready and in the cabin. Heir used his sense of perception to sense it, nodded to him, took out a phone bug from his body and handed it to him. There were several more, told him to remember to send money every month, and then controlled the gold ship to leave. After leaving Gulen Tesoro, Heir came to the cabin and pried open a wooden box. He looked at the neatly stacked gold bricks inside and smiled with satisfaction. Gold, so much. Garrett and Yamato opened their mouths in surprise. Looking at the wooden boxes piled up in the cabin, Garrett pointed with a trembling finger and asked in a trembling voice. Isn't it all these? Heir nodded and answered her affirmatively. Probably around 700 billion belly. 7,000 z. Hearing such a big number, Garrett rolled her eyes and fainted with happiness. Air hugged her helplessly and said, "No, you are the child of 4 emperors after all. Even if you have never seen so much money, there is no need to faint." Garrett held her chest and gasped, and said excitedly, "This is 700 billion. Even my mother may not have to spend so much money. Not to mention that my status among my brothers and sisters is only middle class." Okay, I understand. Take a deep breath first and relax." After finally comforting Garrett, Air found that Yamato's mood was not right either, and quickly called her. "Gold, a lot of gold. Is this the legendary secret treasure?" Yamato murmured in a low voice, wondering if there was a mistake in Odin's book. "Isn't the great secret treasure in Raftel? What's going on with the piles of gold in front of him?" She began to think about which of the great secret treasures was more valuable than the gold, and her brain was almost dry and smoking, and she couldn't even think clearly about it. Only then did she hear Air's voice. Yamato, what's wrong with you? With your personality, shouldn't you be disinterested in these things?" Yamato came back to his senses, looked at Air eagerly, and asked expectantly, "Air, are you my Roger?" What the hell is this? People in Air were dumbfounded and didn't understand what she meant. Seeing this, Yamato quickly opened his mouth to explain to him. "You see, Odin followed Roger to find the great secret treasure, and I followed you to find the Golden Mountain, which is not the same as the great secret treasure, so you are Roger, and I am Odin." Air slapped his forehead. He didn't expect that after educating him for so long, Yin was still talking about being an Odin. Just when he was about to correct him, Yamato suddenly threw himself into his arms, sobbing and whispered, "Air, thank you for taking me out to sea. I know that I am not Odin at all. I just want to see the wonderful scenery around the world," as he wrote in his diary. "But my father never allowed me to go to sea, and even put explosive seastone handcuffs on me. It wasn't until I met you and married you that I saw the scenery outside Wano-kuni for the first time. Although I still don't quite understand what a wife should do, I will study hard and give birth to a baby for you." Chapter 91. Listening to Yamato's heartfelt words, Air was very moved at first, but what the hell is the next thing about giving birth to a baby? Although this will happen sooner or later, are you too hasty? Air smiled, hugged the 2 women into his arms, and whispered, "I am lucky to have met you. I feel extremely happy to have you by my side in the days to come." The 3 of them cuddled together, and the scene was very warm. After that day, the relationship between the 3 of them took a further step, and the 2 women became more open-minded. Yamato pulls Air around every day, saying he wants to give birth to a baby for him, which makes Air very tired every day. Not to be outdone, Garrett said that the Charlotte family has the most say when it comes to having children. It was during these days that Air saw the unique use of butterfruit. Yamato also revealed the form of the phantom beast Oguchi Shingo for the first time, although it was used to speed up and restore physical strength. But this only made Air, who was controlled by Furui, even more excited and worked even harder when getting up. After another stormy night, the group finally arrived at their destination this time. Punk Hazard, an island in the New World, was originally Marines' research base and a place where some prisoners were imprisoned. But just a few months ago, a serious poison gas leak occurred here, and all the Marines and researchers on the island were evacuated. As a result, this place became a dead island. In fact, there is still a group of criminals left here, all of whom were paralyzed in the lower half of their bodies due to inhaling toxic gases, but the government people did not care about them at all, and they still committed suicide by themselves. After Air controlled the spacecraft to the nearby sea area, he held his breath alone and came to this island full of poisonous gas. Although he didn't think that the poisonous gas would be harmful to him due to his physical condition, it was always right to be careful. Without disturbing the group of criminals, Air sensed the only remaining research institute on the island, and was guided to a laboratory by his knowledge. His whole body was wrapped in flames, easily melting the iron door, and Air stepped in. "We have found the failed product that Vegapunk calls the artificial devil fruit made from Kaido's blood factor, the fish fruit phantom beast species, the pink dragon fruit," saying that the peach color reminds people of a certain disgusting garbage. Breaking the glass container and taking out the pink devil fruit inside, Air said to himself excitedly. At first, after Air saw a kid using his ability to turn into a dragon from an animation, he really thought it was a failure. It wasn't until later that he learned that the failed product was just because the color was wrong, and the perfectionist Vegapunk didn't like it. In fact, this fruit can completely compete with Kaido's blue dragon fruit in terms of ability. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Air simply came over and pocketed the fruit. After doing this, he wandered around the institute again, wondering if he could find some information that had not been taken away. After searching for a long time, apart from some useless daily records, I actually found something good for him. Information on artificial devil fruit. No, the signature here is Guy, TM, it's his smile version. Has this guy started researching it so early? I thought it was after he escaped from Marine, I just started researching it. After looking at it for a long time, Air confirmed that this was Guy's artificial devil fruit experiment record, but it was all his failed experiments. It is estimated that SAD will not be studied by him until he gets in touch with Doflamingo and obtains a large number of experimental subjects come out. However, this was still somewhat useful, and Air carefully collected these records. After checking carefully again to confirm that no other information had been pulled down, Air left the place in a flash. The next step was to rush all the way to Alabasta. When passing the Holy Land, Air found that it was much quieter than before, but he still enthusiastically gave them a few rotten seaside ink. During this period, in addition to the major events caused by Air, there are also some hot topics that people are talking about. For example, Ace, whom Air has been paying attention to, entered the New World not long ago. After visiting the red-haired Shanks of the Four Emperors, he launched a challenge to Whitebeard. However, he was stopped by Shichibukai Jinbei, so the two fought for 5 days and 5 nights and ended up tied. Finally, Ace joined the Whitebeard pirates, giving up his dream of becoming the Pirate King, and instead helped Whitebeard become the Pirate King. Air just smiled and put it aside. He was not interested in the famous Ace or Whitebeard, who was known as the strongest in the world. The only one who could make him pay attention was Marshall, who was still dormant in the Whitebeard pirates. Teach. This guy is Air's serious enemy. In more than a year, he will take action against Team 4 Captain Sake, snatch the dark fruit, and then betray the Whitebeard pirates. Afterwards, a series of chain reactions will occur. Air just waited for him to muddy the water, and then fished in the muddy water to take advantage of it. But it's still early for these things to happen. What Air is most concerned about now is how to deal with the 4 menacing women in front of him. Reiju. Watching a play. See Circle Calendar 1518, December 9th at p.m. Air, who had been wandering outside for a long time, finally returned to his loyal Alabasta. He had just stepped off the spaceship, and before he could stand still, a powerful and heavy tempest kick swept towards him. Air waved his hand to disperse the attack easily. Looking towards the direction where the tempest kick came from, he saw Ain slowly lowering his leg. Beside her, Hina, Vivi and Nasha were looking at him wolfishly. Only Reiju came over, gave him a warm hug, and whispered in his ear. Be careful, they are quite angry. Gouda. Air swallowed and looked like Reiju looking for help. But she didn't pay attention, just smiled and waved and walked away. At this time, Garrett and Yamato also jumped off the boat. Looking at the murderous 4 girls opposite, they subconsciously stood beside Air and became vigilant. Hiss, who? Hina was still full of momentum as the royal sister. She held one hand in front of her, looked at Air with a cigarette in her hand and asked coldly. Don't you want to explain it to us? This. Air stood there, hesitating and not knowing how to answer. Yamato next to him started to question first. Who are you? Do you want to fight? Ain laughed angrily at her words. She pointed at Air, raised her head, and said arrogantly. Ask that guy yourself who we are, didn't he tell you? Garrett and Yamato both looked at Air with doubtful eyes, waiting for his explanation. Air scratched his head, laughed awkwardly, and quickly pulled the 2 of them to his children and introduced them. Garrett, Yamato, this is Hina, the former Colonel Marine, and this is Vivi, the Queen of Alabasta. This is Ain, a classmate from the same recruiting camp as me. This is Nasha, my deputy officer when first was in Marine, and the one just now is Reiju, the princess of the Germa Kingdom. After all the names were introduced, Air whispered under the fiery gazes of the women, well, they are all my fiancé. As soon as the words came out, neither Garrett nor Yamato had any unusual reactions, but greeted the girls enthusiastically. Yamato doesn't care about her fiancé, as long as she knows that these people are not enemies but friends. But Garrett was beyond Air's expectation. He originally thought that Garrett would not be able to accept it. Looking at Air's strange look, Garrett smiled and said, "Don't forget, my mother has had 43 husbands. Although I didn't expect you to have so many women, I can still accept it." As soon as these words came out, let alone Air, even Hina's children who wanted to see Air's jokes were fooled by her. Vivi glared at him, smiled and started chatting with the two girls. The other girls also joined in and introduced themselves to each other. For a while, Air became the ignored one. "Really, do you have so many brothers and sisters? It turns out that Katakuri, one of the 4 generals, is such a good brother, I really can't tell. Hey, have you been imprisoned by your own father for so many years? It doesn't matter, we will be your family from now on. Wow, Yamato, are you also a user with the ability of the Phantom Beast Seed Fruit? What kind of ability is it, can you show me?" Looking at the 7 girls who were chatting with each other, Air could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. "Fortunately, I finally got through it." Single quote. Just when he thought this, the 7 girls all cast their captivating glances. Air couldn't help but take a step back, and asked in a trembling voice with inexplicable fear, "What's wrong?" Hina stepped on high heels and came to Air, grabbed his tie, and said while walking back, "Come, follow me back to the house." The other women behind him also followed suit. Arriving at Air's bedroom, Vivi told people not to disturb her, Ain locked the door, Nasha closed the curtains, and Juju took out the rope. A few minutes later, the happy thing did not happen, but Air was tied up like a rice dumpling. Although he was able to break free, he did not do it desperately, but quietly waited for the girls to surrender. "Asshole, every time you go out, you bring back several women. I forgive you this time, but what about next time? Tell me, do you have any other women outside?" Vivi condensed water into a whip, and the air she whipped made a crackling sound. Looking at her expression, she seemed very excited. Air shook his head and hurriedly swore on his dead parents that he would never leave any romantic dead outside. After hearing that he swore on his dead uncle and aunt, the other women breathed a sigh of relief and believed him. But at this moment, the phone bug in Air's clothes rang. Hina loosened the rope a little and took out the phone bug to answer the call. Moses, is this Air? Miss Stussy wants to talk to you, and the pirate empress Shichibukai also asked someone to find me and said she wanted to meet you. I asked Newsbird to take their phone bug to you, so I hung up first." Quote. The voice of Morgans, the Birdman, came from the phone bug. He seemed to be in a hurry, so he said these words in a hurry and hung up the phone. Seeing the cannibalistic eyes of his children, Air tearfully apologized to his parents in heaven, and then became more determined to kill Gurgans. "I said I didn't know, do you believe me? What do you think?" Hina said with a sneer, taking off her gloves as she spoke. Garrett thought for a moment and added, "On the wedding day, I seem to see Air chatting with Miss Stussy." "Oh, that means there are still witnesses. Thank you, I would have forgotten if you didn't say it." With tears in his eyes, Air was beaten severely by his children, led by Hina. Finally, Gao Te, Yamato, and Reiju also found it interesting and joined in. In the end, they kicked Air out of the room and warned him not to enter the house until they forgive him. Helpless, Air had no choice but to buy some things to please them and beg them to give him another chance. At this moment, Reiju was considerate and took the initiative to help Air persuade his children, and then they let him go. However, in order to warn him, he was forced to pay the public food for one night. It was not until the next day that his bones were almost falling apart, and he was let go by his children. Rubbing his waist and walking out of the room, Air sighed. By the way, Yamato looks a little weird. Why does he always like to hang out with Hina? Shaking his head and putting the matter behind him, Air went out and found Vivi, who had been kicked out early and was now handling government affairs. Seeing him come in, Vivi turned away her head angrily, moved a chair to sit next to her in a funny way, and Air comforted. "You are still young, those things are too early for you." Vivi pouted and said angrily, "Humph, you are all bullying me." Sister Hina said so, and so do you. Just wait, I will be an adult in 2 years. Okay, I know, but you haven't done it yet, haven't you? Tell me about the situation in the country during this period. Seeing Air change the subject, Vivi snorted in displeasure, but still told him in detail about Alabasta's latest situation in the past few months. The whole country plus the islands you brought have a total population of 11.2 million. In the national competition held some time ago, we discovered many capable newcomers. Some of the most powerful people were even recruited into the RU unit by Lin Ente, allowing them to learn the 6 moves from the regular members. There are also many young but talented children who have joined RU's youth training camp, RUA, with the permission of their families. In other matters, Bell followed your instructions before leaving and captured Wapple, the king of the Drum Kingdom. Dr. Andy studied the Wapple metal he fused and found that it was indeed a shape that had never appeared before. Memory alloy. 2 weeks ago, Dr. Andy sent news that a new flight power engine had been successfully manufactured, and he applied to carry it on a ship for flight experiments. 24. As for the arsenal, we have completed 2 transactions with the Revolutionary Army. A total of 3,500 rifles have been sold in 2 months, and there are also 500,000 rounds of ammunition totaling 200 million Baileys. The Revolutionary Army is very satisfied with our weapons and urges us to increase production. Director Dodo was extremely happy. Unfortunately, the construction of the arsenal was still in progress, and many precision machines were still being manufactured. Now he could only produce up to 80 rifles per day. Quote, Air listened to her methodical talk and was satisfied with Alabasta's current development. He couldn't help feeling that Vivi had grown up and became more and more like a queen. The two talked about other things, including Air's good brother Binz. Since Air's order was issued, Binz was transferred to the forestry department and started using his ability to plant trees. He must have been unwilling at first, thinking that he should fight bravely on the battlefield to kill the enemy. If it was not possible, it would be fine to let him become a 6-style instructor. But unfortunately, this was the original brother's order, so he had to comply with the boss's order. As a result, this time he really made a name for himself. The big trees that were originally going to be planted one by one, now just need to scatter the tree seeds, and then let him go over to dance and use his abilities, and the entire desert will instantly turn into a forest. Binzi's reputation in the country suddenly rose, and many people admired this pioneer in improving the environment. Seeing that he had so many admirers, Binzi immediately became excited and began to feel that the job was not bad, so he worked harder. Recently, there was news that he found the right girl. It is said that he stayed in the desert and did not plan to come back. After listening, Air silently gave him his blessing, and after discussing with Vivi, gave him a piece of land and the title of Earl. After understanding the situation, Air spoke to Vivi and came alone to the RU troop camp where Lin was located. Nowadays, in addition to the official members of RU, there is also a camp for RUA members composed of RUR members and children. Lin En is now a colonel in the kingdom, responsible for the selection and training of personnel in important protective areas throughout the central region. It can be regarded as the most important history in Air's hands besides Haina's children. Air came to him today to inspect the training of the troops, and the most important thing was to hand over the Phantom Beast Pink Dragon fruit to him. Fantasy beast species. Can I do it? Lin En looked at the fruit handed to him and asked unconfidently. Take it, I prepared this specially for you. You are my most capable subordinate. The stronger you are, the more helpful you will be to me. Air handed the fruit to his hand and affirmed. Lin En looked at Air with enthusiasm. He was so touched by his idol's recognition that he ate the whole fruit in a few mouthfuls without hesitation. Air didn't even rush to stop him. He had already swallowed the fruit and closed his eyes to feel the changes in his body. Not long after, with a dragon roar, a dragon more than 50 meters long appeared above the training ground. Perhaps due to lack of skill, the dragon flew crookedly and could fall down at any time. Lin En released the transformation, landed safely on the ground, looked at his hands and said in disbelief. What a powerful force. I feel that I am more than 10 times stronger now than before. Okay, you are not yet fully familiar with the abilities this fruit brings to you. When you master it or even awaken, this fruit will truly show its power. Lin En nodded excitedly and swore loudly that he would work hard to develop it and not let him down. Now that the fruit has been eaten, Air asked another question that he was more concerned about. How do you think of the hockey training manual I gave you before? It's been almost a year, have you mastered hockey? This, said Hockey. Lin En shook his head in disappointment and said, I am the only one who has barely cultivated the armed color, and the others have not yet entered health at 10 o'clock. It's okay, Hockey, there are things that countless people will never learn in their lifetime. It's normal to have no clue for the time being. You guys should share more experiences with each other. If you have time, you can also teach other people in the RU unit to see if they have any experience. The gift of learning. After speaking, Air thought for a while and added, Hockey still needs to rely on actual combat to gain more understanding. If you contact Theodore and the others, it's time for you to go out and exercise. Actual combat. Lin En became excited immediately after hearing this, and he quickly asked, Your Highness Heir, are we finally going to go out on a mission? Is it to assassinate the leader of an enemy country, or to spy on confidential information? Angrily, Heir slapped him on the head and lectured. What are you thinking about? What you are talking about is the work of the SAS Special Assassination Unit formed by Heir. Your mission this time is to attack a country. Attack the country. Do you just rely on us? Idiot, of course not. This time, the entire RU and RUR troops, as well as a small number of the King's army, will participate in this operation. Then Heir told him about this goal. The Kingdom of Tamatoa has a land area of more than 1 million square kilometers and a population of more than 4 million. It is a major tobacco growing and exporting country. Even the cigarettes Heir usually smokes are produced in this country. Logically speaking, this should be a wealthy country where the people are happy and the country is prosperous. But since the current king came to power 10 years ago, domestic taxes have been mentioned again and again. In addition, it is a member country of the government and has to pay a high amount of heavenly money. As a result, the people of this country are miserable, and there have even been several rebellions in the country. But because King Marlowe III spent a lot of money to build a powerful army, all rebellions were extinguished, and those who dared to resist were massacred. This was the news that was reported back not long ago by a member of the SAS force, the assassination team composed entirely of vampires that Heir had sent to various parts of the world. After Heir learned about it, he thought about letting the guys from the RU army go out to practice their skills, and he just happened to get this country with good conditions in all aspects. After giving the general information, he asked Lin En to contact other people immediately and ask them to gather in the capital in 5 days. After giving the instructions, Heir also left the RU troop station and flew towards the experimental base affiliated to the Academy of Sciences. As soon as they approached the experimental base, there was still some distance to go, but Heir saw the small spacecraft flying in the sky at a glance. Is this a success? With doubts and joy, Heir quickly accelerated and boarded the spacecraft in a flash. The engine is running stably, the generator power is normal, and the speed is improved. Okay, start speeding up. The scientists headed by Andy paid serious attention to the operation of various machines. After confirming that everything was normal, the propellers on both sides of the spacecraft began to rotate. Standing on the deck, Heir watched as the speed increased significantly and slowly reached 60 yards. The spacecraft, which was even still rising, excitedly walked into the operation room where Andy was. Drive Andy, it looks like your research has been successful. Your Highness Heir. Heir's arrival shocked everyone, and Dr. Andy quickly shouted, focus on the console in front of you. After finishing speaking, Andy walked up to Heir and couldn't suppress the smile on his lips and said, Your Highness Heir, it seems that everything is normal in the Baiyun No. 1 power engine at present, but we still need to go through a lot of experiments to ensure its stability. Heir nodded, it's already very good. I heard that you have already undergone 4 test flights. If the test flight can be successful this time, it should be able to produce with less trouble, right? No problem. If everything goes well, we can try to produce part of it. However, the cost of this power engine is still too high. Although part of it has been replaced with Wapo alloy, the main part is still made of gold. It cannot be produced in a short time. A further improvement. Haha, it doesn't matter, that's enough. I brought back a lot of gold this time. I will ask someone to transfer a batch over. We will build 50 ships each for military and civilian purposes. After Andy nodded and said there was no problem, he took Heir with him to visit the test flight experiment of the spacecraft. The Baiyun-1 engine is an improved and reduced model, and it is matched with the Lightning-1 small spacecraft. The Lightning Type 1 is an aerospace warship with a total length of 44 meters and a width of 16 meters. It is distributed in 4 floors, can carry 100 to 200 soldiers, 30 to 40 artillery pieces, and has excellent maneuverability. Its main performance is that it is fast and extremely sensitive, and can well complete the mission of raiding enemy strongholds and escorting large warships. In this world that lacks anti-air capabilities, having a fleet composed entirely of air units is absolutely a fatal blow to the enemy. After witnessing the Lightning Type 1 completing a series of actions such as rapid takeoff, landing, acceleration and turning, Air went to the lower deck with itchy hands, pulled out the artillery and fired a few rounds. Although he didn't hit the target, he was still very satisfied. He asked Andy to continue to improve and strive to create an engine with better performance and more power. After the spacecraft landed, Air went to the Machinery Manufacturing Bureau under the Academy of Sciences for a tour. This is where the equipment needed for the arsenal is manufactured, as well as the subsequent engine production. After being dragged to the stage by the person in charge here to give a speech and promising to increase his bonus, Air left under the adoring eyes of the workers. Well, it seems that nothing is going on. Everything is developing in an orderly manner. After this trip to the Tamatoa Kingdom is over, the country should usher in a golden period of rapid development. Thinking of this, Air happily returned to the palace, pushed his children back who had just gotten up, and served them all with torture. 5 days later, outside the royal capital, the conqueror stood aside. 117 RU troop members, 5,000 RUR members and 20,000 King's Army soldiers have lined up neatly. Air was floating in the air, looking at the soldiers with neat military appearance and high morale below. He shouted loudly. "You should already know the purpose of this time. This is Alabasta's first battle after being expelled from the participating countries. Show your courage and confidence and let the world government know. Alabasta also has a world-leading army. Long live Alabasta." The soldiers shouted in unison that they were not afraid of this war, but full of expectation and motivation. Ever since King Cobra was assassinated by the world government and they were kicked out of the alliance, they have been living in peace. Although His Highness Air repelled Buster Call, the attack on the Holy Land made everyone feel bad. But they are not satisfied yet. They also want to ask the government for an explanation, money or not, for His Majesty Cobra and the people across the country. The first step is to capture the government-joined countries and overthrow the rule of a cruel monarch. Now, Air suddenly opened his hand, and a burst of black mist surged around his body. The old members of the RU unit immediately guessed his plan, and they all smiled as if they were watching a good show. Group transformation. An overwhelming number of little bats flew out of the black mist, covering the sky in an instant and hovering above everyone's heads. The soldiers didn't understand what His Highness was going to do, but they didn't panic and believed in their hearts that His Highness would not harm them. As soon as Air had an idea, the little bat instantly flew towards the new members of the RU unit and the entire RUR unit. Looking at the little bat landing on their shoulders, everyone was confused, and before they could figure out what was going on, the little bat bit their necks. Under the horrified eyes of the King's army, all the soldiers who were first embraced screamed, but fortunately they recovered quickly. Feeling the changes in their bodies, their initial panic turned into excitement. Especially after seeing everyone in the RU troop transformed, they became even happier. This is supposed to be a reward you can only get after you become an RU unit, but this time the situation is special and I allow you to transform in advance. After this mission is over, if you too can't master one of the 6 postures within a month, just get out of here. Quote. Yes, everyone in RUR was shocked and responded loudly. Don't be envious, King's soldiers, work hard to improve yourself. Even if you can't enter the RU and other units, as long as you perform well enough and make meritorious deeds on the battlefield, I will reward you as your first supporter. Yes, the King's army looked at the RUR members who were flapping their wings and became obviously stronger, and secretly vowed in their hearts that from now on, those born in 790 must work harder and strive to become one of them. Okay, that's all. Let's get on the boat and get ready to set off. After hearing the order, the officers began to arrange for the soldiers to board the ship in an orderly manner. Seeing that everything was in order, Air's figure flashed to a room in the distance. At this time, several women are waiting for him here. As soon as she saw Air, Yamato was the first to pounce. She stared at Air with bright eyes and said coquettishly, Air, take me with you, I also want to fight. Before Air could say anything, Aine, Garrett and other women hurriedly came over and asked to go with him, making Air's head grow bigger. Hina looked at Vivi, who was alone and aggrieved, thought for a while and said, You all stay with me, let Air go alone. Why? Nasha asked reluctantly. I have no objection. Reju agreed with a smile. Looking at everyone present, Hina calmly explained. This time Air has taken away almost all the elites in the country. Just in case, we must stay to ensure the safety of the rear. And can you bear to leave Vivi alone at home? After listening to her words, the girls turned to look at Vivi. Indeed, as the queen, she was the one who couldn't leave here, and every time they went out, she was left alone to look after the house. They felt a little sorry for her. Vivi looked at Hina movedly, not expecting that she would consider her own feelings, and quickly started to act coquettishly in her arms. Air looked at this scene and couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth. Haven't you been arguing about who is the eldest sister in the family? I don't need to say more now. Hina is the most suitable in every aspect. Hearing Air's words, the girls also sincerely admitted Hina's sister's status. They really couldn't take care of every sister's emotions like her. Only such people can be called sisters. Sister Hina. Hearing their names, Hina also smiled rarely. Okay, that's it for the plot of Sisterly Love, it's time for me to set off. Air directly interrupted the warm atmosphere in the room and said goodbye to them. A moodless man. Idiot. Leave far away. The children scolded him for a while, but still waved goodbye to him and watched Air disappear from sight. CEFJ. When he returned to the Conqueror, the soldiers were ready and came to their respective rooms to wait. The Conqueror has a total of 8 floors. The penultimate floor is the artillery floor, which houses a total of 300 artillery pieces. It is also where the gunners and some soldiers live. On the upper floor are the accommodation areas, canteens, etc. for most of the king's troops. The third to last floor is also the artillery floor, but in addition to housing the gunners, this is the main place where artillery shells are stored. During wartime, soldiers could transport artillery shells to the lower floors via elevators. Further up is the living area, which is mainly where soldiers rest and conduct daily training. The ship's engine is also here. The 4th floor is the residential area for RU and RUR members. The environment here is better and there are a lot of entertainment facilities. The 3rd floor is a place where soldiers can completely relax. There are competitive venues designed by Air such as billiards, badminton, and table tennis, as well as leisure facilities such as bars and saunas. The 1st and 2nd floors above are completely private places for Air and the girls. Not only do they have more comprehensive amusement facilities, but there are also hundreds of service staff, all of whom are women. Since this ship was built by Judge for luxury and entertainment, it does not carry many weapons and soldiers. If Air hadn't had someone modify it, Tien Kai's spaceship might not even have a place to stay for more than 20,000 people. This made Air wonder if Judge, the old boy, did it on purpose, and guessed that he didn't want to see that he had such a powerful battleship. Since there are no professionals who can control the spacecraft, Air has to use his own ability to control the spacecraft to take off and fly towards the target, the Kingdom of Tamatoa. Grand Line, not far from the waters of Sabayati Archipelago, where the Kingdom of Tamatoa is located. At this time, King Tamatoa, Babbitt Marlowe III, was entertaining a distinguished guest. Junia, are you still used to living here during this time? If you are not satisfied with anything, I will ask the servant to relieve you immediately. Opposite him, the woman named Junia shook her head with a smile, and said with a moved face. Thank you, Marlowe. The Holy Land now stinks and is attacked from time to time. It is no longer safe to live in. Fortunately, you took me in, otherwise I would have nowhere to go. Don't say that. It's an honor for you to come and stay with me temporarily. I should thank you. The two of them looked at each other, the deep love in their eyes could hardly be concealed. Marlowe looked at the woman in front of him and cheered excitedly. Ever since he attended the World Summit with his father 12 years ago and saw the beautiful celestial dragons named Top Manzania Palace in front of him, he fell in love at first sight. Fallen. Later, after learning about the nobility of celestial dragons from his father, his love for Zania not only did not weaken, but became even more passionate. So he had the ridiculous idea of marrying a beauty and becoming the new celestial dragons. When the old king passed away 10 years ago, after he ascended the throne, he immediately began to collect gold and silver treasures in the country and sent them to Junia. Unexpectedly, the noble Miss Junia actually wrote him a reply. Although the letter only thanked him for his kindness, Marlowe mistakenly thought that he had been recognized by the other party. So he searched for money even more intensively. After the treasury was emptied, he immediately asked people to increase taxes, just to please Junia. In this way, at the World Summit 2 years later, the two met for the first time. Junia thanked him in person and expressed a hint of love. After the elated Marlowe returned to China, he immediately promulgated more stringent tax laws, which caused ordinary people to take out the last bit of Bailey in their pockets. It was like this for 8 years. The two exchanged letters frequently and met frequently during the 2 World Summits. During this meeting, Marlowe felt that the heat was almost up and formally proposed to Junia. Junia, however, did not immediately agree because her parents did not agree to their marriage. But Junia sincerely promised Marlowe that she would do her best to persuade her parents to facilitate this marriage and let him become a celestial dragon. Although Marlowe was a little depressed, he happily agreed and immediately returned to China to prepare gifts for his father-in-law and mother-in-law. But what he didn't know was that Junia was just looking at the large amount of gold and silver jewelry he sent. Antoine wrote a few words of thanks. Unexpectedly, he later sent more and more money. Junia, who guessed what the other party was thinking, simply followed the trend, seeking money while also satisfying her bad taste. Then it got to this point. Just when Marlowe proposed marriage and Xenia casually teased him and thought it was time to get rid of this toy, air came. That flood from the sky not only destroyed a lot of buildings, but even took away one of her celestial dragon's best friends. Junia was frightened out of her heart and felt that she could no longer stay in the Holy Land. Who knew whether the madman would come again? As a result, air really threw something down every few days. Although the powerful men in the Holy Land later took precautions and no celestial dragons died, injured celestial dragons abounded. After half a month of trembling with fear, Junia finally remembered her #1 dog, Marlowe, so she wrote him a letter overnight, packed up her belongings, and ran here to take refuge despite her parents' dissuasion. Marlowe greeted her for a while, fearing that Junia would be impatient, so he ordered someone to take care of her and left. Soon, I will be able to marry Xenia and become celestial dragons. Speaking of which, I have to thank the fire dragon even more. Thanks to him, my plan went so smoothly. Thinking happily, Marlowe came to the throne room. In the throne room, his right-hand men, former pirate captain and now military minister Walker, and finance minister Yerkes Cyril were already waiting here. Marlowe sat on the throne, looked at the two people below and asked calmly, "Walker, how are you dealing with those rioting untouchables?" "Your Majesty the King, your men have just received news that the untouchables have been suppressed and the leader of the rebel army has been executed in public." Walker looked at the soon-to-be celestial dragons. Marlowe lowered his head and said respectfully, "Ha ha ha, you did a good job, this is the price for disobeying me." Marlowe was quite happy, counting this one, all 4 rebel armies in the kingdom had been wiped out, and he could make money safely again. But before he could be happy for long, Finance Minister Cyril reported bad news to him. "Your Majesty, we have purchased a large amount of luxurious furniture, clothing, jewelry, etc. for the Junia Palace in the past few days. There are not many Baileys in the treasury. We can no longer afford this with soldiers' military pay." Military pay. Speaking of this, Marlowe calmed down. Although he was fascinated by Junia, it did not mean that he was a fool. He knew very well that soldiers were the guarantee of their own rights, and no one should be wronged by them. Otherwise, if they come armed to ask for wages, I won't be able to bear it. Masuo thought for a while with his chin raised, and Weilu suddenly showed a weird smile. The rebels must have the support of ordinary people behind them, otherwise it would not have been possible on such a large scale. Then shouldn't these untouchables also pay a price for this? Walker also smiled evilly after hearing his words. Point 0. What do you mean? Tell the soldiers that I allow them to collect military expenses in the rebel areas, and 70% of the money received will be handed over, and the rest will be given to them. Yes, I thank His Majesty for your kindness on behalf of the soldiers. Ha ha ha. ... With a wave of Marlowe's hand, the order was conveyed. The soldiers were of course very happy when they found out. They couldn't hold it any longer. Under the leadership of their commanders, they began to smash doors from house to house and rush in to snatch all valuable items. The ordinary people here are really unlucky. Their husbands, fathers, brothers, and sons have just died on the battlefield. They haven't had time to grieve, and now they have to face the burning, killing, and looting of the soldiers. In a small town, a soldier kicked open the door and called several brothers to rush in together. Soon the sound of smashing and the owner's pleading came from the house, and soon the man's begging for mercy and the woman's wailing and shouting came to mind. But with the sound of a gunshot, the man's voice suddenly disappeared, leaving only the heart-rending screams of the women and the excited laughter of the soldiers in the room. And scenes like this are happening in every corner of the town. In an inconspicuous dilapidated hut, a dark figure observed the situation outside the window, then turned around and went to the back room, opened a small door on the floor and walked out. In the basement, 4 SAS members gathered together and waited anxiously. Seeing the figure coming down, he quickly stepped forward to surround him and asked, "Captain, how is the situation outside?" The man called the captain was named Petey. He pushed aside a few people, sat down at the small table, lit a cigarette, and remained silent. "Captain, please speak. I can hear screams and wailing in the basement. What is happening outside?" Petey took a puff of cigarette, the smoke covered his face, and he said hoarsely. It was all in chaos, the whole town was in chaos. Countless soldiers were destroying everything in the city, killing, setting fires, robbing, and raping. They committed all kinds of evil, and the townspeople suffered heavy casualties. One person opened his mouth in surprise and shouted in disbelief. "What's going on? Aren't they soldiers who protect the country? Why do they kill the civilians they are supposed to protect? Idiot, be quiet," another person yelled at him. Then he lit a cigarette and said calmly, "Do you think that all countries are Alabasta, and that all leaders are benevolent monarchs like His Majesty Cobra, His Majesty Vivi, and His Majesty Air? Don't be stupid, newcomer, this kind of garbage king is the norm in this world, be more open-minded." Quote. Newcomer Garden gritted his teeth and asked unwillingly, "Then we are just going to watch like this? Isn't His Highness Air coming with his army? Where are they?" In response to his question, the others remained silent and did not speak. Just then there was a bang and a lot of dust fell from the ceiling. Everyone was shocked, and they all heard the sound of cannon. "What's going on? Are they crazy? They're using cannons in the city. I'll go out and take a look." After saying that, Petey hurriedly ran up again, and after a while he came back with a dark face. The remaining rebels in the city organized a resistance, and those fools directly brought artillery, intending to eliminate the rebels together with the resisting people. "What?" the 4 people exclaimed in unison. Garden couldn't sit still at all. He pulled out his long knife and rushed out to kill those fools. Others quickly grabbed him and told him not to act rashly. Just when the 4 people were in a mess and pushing each other, they heard Petey yelling, "Calm down, everyone." The newcomer thought that the captain was also going to stop him, so he shouted excitedly, "Captain, I..." "Shut up. Listen to me." Petey roared at him again, and then Petey took a deep breath and calmly issued the order. "Newcomer, please pass on the news here immediately. Others will get their weapons and go with me to chop up these fools." Garden looked at the captain who always laughed at him, stood up and saluted with joy, and shouted loudly, "Promise to complete the mission." Others also showed cruel smiles, drew their weapons and came to Petey's side. Before leaving, Petey smiled and said to the newcomer, "Boy, hurry up and finish the report, otherwise we will kill all the enemies." After saying that, Petey instantly turned into a bat and rushed out of the secret passage. The other 3 people also transformed and followed together. After the 4 people left, the newcomer quickly took out his phone and started to contact his boss. Bang bang bang. "Come for me and kill everyone who dares to resist." An officer of the Tamatoa Kingdom Army was brandishing a long sword and commanding his field soldiers to charge. Beside him, 10 artillery pieces were roaring continuously, bombarding the streets and alleys indiscriminately. In a dilapidated residential building, several rebel soldiers exchanged fire with the enemies outside with muskets. Suddenly a bomb struck, and with an explosion, the residential building collapsed instantly, and several rebels also lost their lives. When the Royal Army saw that the building where the enemy was located was destroyed, they cheered quickly, lined up and rushed in. Because the people did not have enough people to command them, they just fought on their own and resisted with difficulty with some rags scattered here and there. On the other hand, the Royal Army's weapons and equipment are excellent, and they also have unified command and dispatch. When the two collide, a large number of people will be killed and injured immediately. Just when the rebels were almost wiped out and the people were about to lose their support, 4 figures with wings on their backs, like demonic figures, rushed into the Royal Army and killed dozens of royal soldiers with swords in their hands. The offensive of the Royal Army suddenly stalled, but soon the commander of the army reacted and called for soldiers to surround them, intending to remove these nails first. Petey slashed the neck of a soldier in front of him with his sharp claws, and then moved his ears. His keen hearing allowed him to immediately discover the location of the opponent's commander. "You guys hold on, I'll kill their commander." Leaving behind a word, Petey spread his wings and rushed straight to the enemy's rear regardless of the overwhelming bullets. The commander was startled when he saw the figure flying towards him, and quickly asked the soldiers to concentrate their firepower to knock the opponent down. Bang bang bang. Continuous gunshots rang out, and although Petey tried his best to dodge, he was still hit several times. Feeling the pain on his body, his ferocity was completely aroused. With a flutter of his wings, his speed increased a lot, and he walked directly through the crowd and came to the commander who was about to escape. "No, do not want." The commander who was about to escape looked at Petey who was approaching in horror. As soon as he let out a scream, his neck was bitten tightly. "Gouda Gouda." As his throat trembled, the commander only roared a few times before his whole body turned into a shriveled corpse. Throwing the body away, Petey wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and showed a bloodthirsty smile to the frightened soldiers. "I saw that the bullet holes in body were healing rapidly, and the projectiles fell out of his body under the squeeze of his muscles and fell to the ground." The surrounding Royal Army soldiers looked at this scene that was beyond their understanding, swallowed nervously, and subconsciously clenched the muskets in their hands. After someone shouted, "Shoot," dense bullets were fired at Petey from all directions. Petey crossed his hands to protect his head and rushed directly into the crowd with his feet, starting to kill everyone. The 4 Pitus were originally elite soldiers in the army. After being selected into the SAS and receiving air's first support, their strength was greatly enhanced. Apart from anything else, it was easy to slaughter these novice soldiers. With the 4 of them chopping melons and vegetables, plus Garden who came to support them, in just half an hour, hundreds of soldiers in the city were slaughtered. This was after the other party ran away and several people spent a lot of effort to find him. After dealing with the enemy, the 5 people gathered together to discuss. Then Petey came alone to the street where the people were hiding and shouted, "Everyone, I am here to help you, you are already safe." His words reached the ears of every citizen on the street, but no one dared to respond after seeing that they had just killed people in all directions. At this time, a window of a house was opened, and a little girl stuck her head out and asked curiously, "Uncle, are you a rebel?" "Uncle, it's my brother," Petey cursed, and just as he was about to answer, the little girl was dragged back into the house by her mother, and even the window was closed. He sighed and looked back at his teammates. They shrugged helplessly, indicating that they couldn't cope with it. Seeing this, Petey had no choice but to shout again, "We are not rebels, but soldiers of Alabasta. Please rest assured that I will not hurt you." Alabasta, never heard of it. Isn't that the country where the world's most evil criminal, the fire dragon Air, lives? What? Then we'd better not go out. Anyone who has anything to do with a fire dragon is definitely not a good person. What do you know? It's a slander by the government. Didn't you read the previous newspaper? The fire dragon Air is a marine supernova, synonymous with justice. Then the newspapers now say that he is the incarnation of evil, a pervert murderer who attacks the Holy Land. Quote, Petey's super hearing allowed him to hear everyone's whispers, just when he regretted saying those words and making the people panic even more. The little girl just now ran out of the house, came to Petey, looked up at him and said, "I know Fire Dragon." Dad collected all his newspapers and said he was a heavenly hero. Lily, the little girl's mother, ran out in panic and quickly hugged her in her arms, too scared to look at Petey. Petey raised his hand and took a few steps back, indicating that he would not do anything. Then he smiled and said to the little girl, "Your father is right, His Highness Heir is the hero of the entire Alabasta. He not only captures pirates, but also helps ordinary people in need. It also improves our country's environment so that there will never be a drought in Alabasta. It has also implemented many policies so that children can receive education and citizens can receive good medical treatment. Even more so when His Majesty King Cobra was murdered by the government and betrayed by Marine, who had served for many years, he single-handedly repelled Buster Call, defeated Marine Admiral, and saved tens of millions of citizens." Quote. Speaking of Heir, he seemed to have 3 days and 3 nights to talk about. He listed all the policies implemented by Heir and all the advantages he thought were the advantages one by one. Even if Heir came in person, he would be confused. Degree. Listening to his heartfelt narration, some people who had seen the Heir news and were willing to believe him came out and approached him cautiously to talk to him. Petey looked at the people who were finally willing to communicate with him and let out a long sigh of relief. After discussing with the residents, he quickly waved over the other 4 people, assigned each of them to lead a team, and began to search for survivors in the city. Fortunately, the firefight just now was only concentrated in the west of the city, and the people in other places were not greatly affected. But even so, many people were killed because they resisted when soldiers forced their way into the house. There are also many women who are half-clothed and dying with many scratches all over their bodies. Petey and others suppressed their anger and quickly organized people to carry those who were still breathing for treatment, and took the dead outside the city for burial. While they were rescuing the wounded and mourning the dead, the commander of the Royal Second Army, General Alex, received the news from his subordinates. What? The 23rd Brigade was completely wiped out. Is the information accurate? After the communications soldier respectfully handed the information in his hand to Alex, he stood at attention and reported. Reporting to the general, half an hour ago, the 26th Brigade received the other party's request for help. Just when the 26th Brigade packed up its luggage and prepared to go to support, the 23rd Brigade could no longer be contacted. Just in case, the commander of the 26th Brigade reported the situation to us and asked for your next instructions. Half an hour. Did you only last for such a short time? It seems that the opponent is very powerful. Alex thought for a while, asked his men to bring the map, spread it flat on the table and asked, "What other troops are there near the 23rd Brigade?" The communications soldier thought for a moment, pointed at 5 locations on the map, and said, "There are also the 11th, 17th, 24th, 31st, and 35th Brigades." "Okay, let them and the 26th Brigade gather together and launch a tentative attack together." "Yes." The signal soldier wrote down the general's order, turned around and left. "Humph, a bunch of useless trash, wasting Lousy's time." Alex cursed, turned and walked into his lounge. Before the door closed, you could clearly see 2 naked men inside, hanging from the ceiling, with bloody marks of whipping all over their bodies. After spending a day and a night, Petey and others finally cleaned up the town. All the injured have been gathered together and resettled, and those who can still move spontaneously organize a team to help take care of the wounded and find food. Petey was sitting and chatting with Lily and her mother. Through questioning, he found out that Lily's father used to be a Marine, but he broke an arm in a battle and had no choice but to retire and go home. But life at home was not easy. He finally found a wife, got married, and had children. As a result, the king added a series of messy taxes. Unable to bear it, he decided to join the rebel army. Relying on the knowledge he had gained from being a Marine, he became an instructor and was responsible for teaching Xinxian how to use muskets and artillery. Just when the rebels were thinking about overthrowing the king and liberating the country, the kingdom's 2nd Legion came, and the opponent crippled them in just one battle. Then all the forces that dared to resist were wiped out in a devastating manner. Lily's father also died in the subsequent sweeps, leaving only the mother and daughter. After listening to their stories, Petey couldn't help but sigh. Just when he was thinking about how to comfort them, someone suddenly ran over in a panic and shouted, "The Royal Army is coming! Lord Petey, the Royal Army is coming! There are many people." The people resting here immediately went crazy and shouted out one after another, "What? The Royal Army is here again? These guys, aren't they going to let us go? If that's the case, then Lousy will fight them." My parents and brothers were all killed, and I want to avenge them. With the weapons left behind by the previous army and a few adults here, we can definitely destroy them. Yes, I also want to avenge my daughter. What was different from what Petey thought was that when they heard the arrival of the royal army, these people did not have to be afraid. Instead, they turned the sadness of the death of their family members and friends into anger, and they all started to fight each other desperately. But Petey had not been overwhelmed by the negative emotions. Instead, he calmed everyone down and then ordered Garden to inquire about the situation and prepare to make plans when he came back. Petey and his party didn't wait long, and Garden came back soon. Garden folded his wings and came to a few people, and said with a gloomy face, "Captain, they have a lot of people here this time. I made a rough estimate, there are at least 3,000 to 4,000 people." 3 or 4,000. After murmuring, Petey held his chin and began to think. "Captain, there are too many people on the other side. If a fight breaks out, we won't be able to kill all the enemies in a while. And what if those guys rush in directly and massacre civilians?" Quote, "Don't worry, just follow my arrangements." Petey's voice sounded, and at the critical moment, his mind became unusually calm. "Protecting the people is our first goal. There is no need to fight with the royal army." After saying that, he turned to the temporary leader of the people and said, "You organize women and children to hide in safe places, and let the men who can still move take weapons to protect them." After saying that, he took out the phone and said to the 4 people in Garden, "This is the contact number of another team in the Kingdom of Tamatoa. I will notify them to come over for support as soon as possible, but that will be at least 2 days later. We have to hold them back, try to slow down their attack, and wait for the arrival of another team or His Highness Heir." Quote, "Yes." After receiving the order, the group of people began to take action. Some of the men took the weapons left by the previous royal army and began to guard the surroundings, while some helped the injured or the elderly and weak to evacuate. "Uncle Petey, can you defeat the bad guy?" Lily trotted over, hugged Petey's thigh and asked expectantly. Petey knelt down and rubbed her little head, and said firmly, "Don't worry, little Lily, the uncles are very strong, and those bad guys are no match for us." After speaking, he took Lily's little hand, led her to her mother's side, and told them to hide. Lily's mother glanced at him gratefully, and then Lily followed the others and started to move. After everything was arranged, Petey came to the 4 team members and said, "Okay, it's time for us to have a big fight. Let's go and let the enemy know how powerful our sass is." The 5 people spread their wings and flew out of the city together, came to the Royal Army barracks, dispersed, and began to press their footsteps. 2 days later, another SAS team finally joined Petey and his team. However, the Royal Army at this time was no longer the original 3,000 people, but a full 20,000 strong army that was reorganized after the arrival of follow-up troops. When Toynbee, the captain of the other team, saw the densely packed army outside the city, he couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. "Hey, Petey, is this the small number of enemies you mentioned? You wouldn't deliberately trick me into dying, would you? There are so many people. Even if our resilience is extraordinary, the opponent can kill us with one shot." Quote, Petey gave a wry smile. Although he was not injured at all in the 2 days of fighting, his spirit was extremely exhausted. However, he still patiently explained what happened to Toynbee. After listening, Toynbee didn't say anything about them disobeying orders and acting without authorization. After all, a few months ago, they were just soldiers protecting civilians, not the cold-blooded murderers in the CP organization who had been brainwashed since childhood. Regarding Petey's decision at that time, several people did not think there was anything wrong with him. Toynbee patted him on the shoulder, smiled helplessly, and said, "I understand, leave the rest to us, you go back and rest first." Petey nodded. Unable to bear it anymore, he found a place and fell asleep. "Let's go, it's our turn to take action. Be careful, the main goal is to contain them and not get too entangled with the enemy." After saying that, Toynbee also led people to harass the royal army. In this way, 10 SAS soldiers took turns harassing the enemy during the day, and turned into bats to assassinate the opponent's officers at night, which dragged on for another 3 days. But even so, their results were not satisfactory. Under the intensive firepower of the 20,000-strong army, they did not dare to rush in and only caused a small number of casualties to the opponent. But the other party's support came again. General Alex finally couldn't sit still after hearing the intelligence reported by his subordinates. I personally brought all the troops of the Second Army to this unknown town. After an army of more than 40,000 people surrounded the town, Alex was no longer in a hurry. Instead, he ordered the soldiers to pull out cannons and began bombarding them indiscriminately, intending to directly level the entire town. Faced with this situation, Petty and others could do nothing. They could only follow the civilians and hide in basements, wine cellars, pianos, and other places to avoid the continuous incoming artillery fire. Just as they were secretly cursing and hating this bunch of trash who didn't care about the lives of civilians, the phone bug on Petty's body suddenly rang. Boloo boloo boloo, gaga. Petey answered the phone, and a strange voice came from inside. I'm Lin, Captain Petty, reporting on your situation. Lin, is it Lin, the genius of the kingdom and the strongest member of the Ru unit? Petey suppressed the shock in his heart and told the current situation in detail. I understand. Please pay attention to your safety. We will arrive at Juntian in a few minutes. Yes. After saying that, the other party hung up the phone. Petey and the others cheered excitedly and quickly informed the others of the good news. On the Conqueror, Lin hung up the phone and said to Air in the main seat, Your Highness, they are still safe at the moment, but they probably won't last long. Air closed his eyes and said nothing. At this time, he was using his sight to explore the entire kingdom of Tamatoa. With the intensity of his sight now, not to mention this small country, even Alabasta, which has thousands of square kilometers, was under his sight, within coverage. After scanning the town where Petty and others were, and seeing that they were temporarily safe, Air turned his attention elsewhere. This country has a large population, and this is the king. I didn't expect that the country is like this, and this guy is still trying to please women, huh? Official Junia, celestial dragons, there is actually a sky here. Question mark exclamation mark. Air opened his eyes, showing a surprised look. Looking at Lin En who was quietly waiting for orders, he said. This operation will be left to your command. You and Doreen will discuss how to do it specifically. I only have one request, which is to eliminate all resisting enemies without harming civilians. It's 680. Lin En, who didn't expect that he would take on such an important task, stuttered for a while, then hesitantly agreed. Seeing his useless look, Air couldn't help but said. Didn't you eat? Make your voice louder. Lin En was startled and quickly stood at attention and shouted Kaido, yes. Very good, very energetic. Remember, now is the time to test your military strategy course learning results. Maintain this momentum and let me see what you are capable of. Lin En saluted, raised his head and left with confidence. It didn't take long for the sirens to sound inside the ship, and the soldiers began to assemble quickly under the leadership of their commanders. The commanders of each unit were also called to the conference room by Lin En to begin discussing tactics. Air watched Lin issue orders in an orderly manner and smiled with satisfaction. After everything was arranged, the Conqueror had already arrived over the town where Petty and others were. Looking at the densely packed enemy below through the video phone bug, Lin decisively asked the soldiers to carry out continuous artillery bombardment (CEFH) to pour out all the firepower immediately. What kind of scene would 600 artillery pieces fire at the same time? You must know that Marine's Buster Call is only 10 warships firing at the same time. Each Marine warship has third-gate artillery at the front and rear, 12 on each side, for a total of 30 artillery pieces. But when a warship fires its guns, only a total of 18 cannons that can rotate on one side and front and rear are involved in firing, and 10 ships only fire a salvo of 180 cannons. But the Conqueror is different. The artillery on it has guide rails that can be moved at will. It can completely fire 600 artillery pieces at the same time. Soon, with several rounds of artillery fire, the Second Army collapsed in an instant. Corpses and pieces of flesh were flying everywhere on the battlefield, and the soldiers were frightened and fled in panic. They never imagined in their lifetime that such a big ship could fly in the sky and let them know what artillery fire meant. After a few more rounds of salvo fire, Lin ordered the bombardment to stop, and after the Conqueror lowered to a certain height, he asked the soldiers to board the landing platform to prepare. The landing platform is connected by several iron cables and can send 2,000 soldiers down at one time. Soon the soldiers were landed on the landing platform in batches, while the members of RU and RUR spread their wings and flew down. By the time air came down, the soldiers had completed their assembly. Petey and others also ran out of the dilapidated town and came to Air to salute immediately. Air patted his shoulder and said, "Well done, you are a role model for soldiers. When I go back this time, I will promote you to squadron leader." "Yes, thank you very much." Petey felt the clapping hands on his shoulders and shed tears of emotion. There is nothing more exciting than being recognized by your idol. After praising the other 9 SAS members, Air nodded to Lin and turned into lightning and rushed towards the capital. At this time, King's Road in Wanmeadow was furious. What's going on? The entire Second Army has been dragged outside a small town for so long without any results. Military Minister Walker listened to the king's rebuke, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and said, "Your Majesty, please give me a little more time. I believe that General Alex will definitely eliminate all enemies. Maybe he will have it done as we speak." Walker racked his brains to explain and calm Marlowe's emotions. Seeing that the king was about to become celestial dragons, he did not want to leave an incompetent evaluation in the other party's mind at this juncture. At this moment, the phone bug on Walker suddenly rang. He was so happy that he quickly took out the phone bug and said to Marlowe, "Your Majesty, it must be General Alexius who has sent good news." Marlowe finally lost some of his anger and asked him to pick it up quickly. Walker nodded repeatedly, picked up the phone and asked expectantly, "Have the enemy been defeated? Report your results quickly." But the other party's answer made Walker feel like he had fallen into an ice cave. "Sir Walker, our army was attacked by unknown enemies and has suffered heavy losses. General Alex has also died in the battle. Please save us quickly." "Impossible." Walker interrupted the other party's words with an angry roar. He couldn't believe it at this time. One of the 3 major legions of the kingdom was defeated in such an inexplicable way. "Are you kidding me? The 2nd Legion is the kingdom's standing army, with a total strength of 50,000 people. How could it be defeated?" The soldier on the other side didn't believe the boss when he saw it, so he quickly explained anxiously, "It's true, Mr. Walker, I didn't lie to you. The other side had a spaceship that covered the sky. They only conducted a few rounds of bombardment, and General Alex was killed. The army was also bombed and collapsed." In order to increase the persuasiveness of his words, Xiaobing also said an important message. "By the way, I remember that the opponent's 2 flags are a sun surrounded by 8 Magatama, and a giant dragon surrounded by lightning. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more."